In this video, I'm going to draw this thing. This will be a real-time, fully narrated tutorial where I show you how I do this illustration from start to finish in Photoshop. And while I do that, I'm going to talk about something I think is really important. How as artists, we often have to navigate a challenge where we combine our creative desires, our artistic desires with our career desires and business desires, and how this is often at the core of what success really means. The reason that I'm talking about this is because I've just launched a new paid community that helps artists do exactly this and really find who they want to be as an artist and teach them the skills needed to actually make that happen. Now, as usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is going to be neither fast-paced nor heavily edited. This is just you and me. We're in Photoshop. I'm showing you exactly how I do this, and I'm just going to talk about my experiences learning through community and how we often have to build these different skills and all of the challenges out there that we face as artists trying to learn how to build successful careers right now. Hopefully that sounds interesting. Hopefully you'll join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Okay, just quickly before we jump in, the community that I've been building and working on for the last kind of 6 months to a year really is called Mighty Artisan, and it's designed to do exactly what I said in the intro, really take people who are interested in developing their own fantasy worlds, their stories, their artistic projects, and either doing this by themselves, making your own things, or doing it in a team with other people, and really looking at how we actually build the skills, not just art and craft, but also business, productivity, and our ability to project manage and really kind of make a lot of these larger aspirations and dreams and desires we have out as artists, how we actually make that happen, how we actually make that real, so that ultimately we can kind of live more creative lives and have kind of interesting careers and get all of this stuff actually happening. So this is something I'm just launching at the moment, and I'll leave a link to it down below. It's something where probably if you're listening to this right now, you can still join for the next kind of 2 to 3 days. But yeah, I'm just doing limited intakes for this for the moment for 2025. And the idea is I'm just sort of building a cool bunch of people who are interested in these things. This is a paid community. It's not for everyone. It's really for people who are serious about these different things. Doesn't matter where you are on your skill level, but the goal is we're all coming together to really kind of work on these issues and develop good skills around productivity, business, authorship, and sort of craft process. Try and create, again, a good connection between our creative desires and our sort of career desires. So anyway, it's a really sort of fun project I've been working on. If you're interested in it, I'll leave a link down below. If you're watching this after this kind of initial intake is there, I'll be doing another one in a couple of months. And yeah, if you follow that link, I'll probably sort of give you a little waitlist thing you can sign up to if you're interested. But yeah, I'm mostly interested in what you think about this idea and these kind of ideas and concepts I'm going to share about community learning, about the different challenges we face with sort of social media drama and headlines and FUD, and just the challenges that exist when it comes to really trying to build a career today. So that's what I'm mostly interested in. Let me know in the comments down below kind of how this kind of lands for you. But anyway, let's jump in and we'll start drawing this thing. Okay, so before I begin talking about community and why I think this is a good thing and why I've started a new community, let's look at the process that we're going to be using here. So I have one of these kind of template files that I normally use, and this for me is just an easy way to kind of jump in and get started. I've taken a little photo of a thumbnail that I did in my sketchbook that is pretty rough, but I think it's going to give us the idea. What my idea is this is not something groundbreaking or new for me, but we're going to have a fantasy character, maybe something that's like a bit sort of dying Earth, sort of far futuristic, some like weird technology stuff going on here in some weird sort of alien environment with a cool background. So again, nothing particularly new for me, but this is what I like to do, just when I have some time, sit down, draw something, create something, put it out into the world. And again, this is, as we'll touch on, is one of the things that I think is really important to kind of practice and have a place that you can go and do this. That's kind of not social media. But anyway, what I'm going to do is, as I've said, I've just like copy this, and this has a slightly different aspect ratio. So what I'm going to do is take this that I've kind of just selected and copied. I'm going to make it larger. Boom. And I'll see what I want to do. What we might do is end up kind of making this a little bit, yeah, a little bit wider, right? Like something like that. So I could probably do this. We'll see how we go in terms of sort of finish and stuff. This might start to destroy this computer. We'll see. Because this will become a pretty big file. But yeah, what I can do is now just kind of stretch the actual canvas. And what do we get? Oh yeah, that's it doesn't like that, hey. 14,000 pixels. Let's do it, right? We're heading into the future. 4K is going to be the new 1080p, right? Soon we'll have 8K screens. This thing is going to be nothing, right? 16K is probably coming. So you got to prepare, make big files if you can, like as hard and as big as your computer can go. Let's do it. All right. Boom. So let's see if we can find a pencil. Now for this, again, there's so many different sort of pencils you could kind of use. I'm going to try and go for something that's like really rough, because often people are like, which pencil are you using? And I'm just going to use the literal round brush tool, right? With nothing on it as a pencil. We're just going to make it, sort of a decent size. I might actually step down the opacity. Boom. If I can. Yeah, like 70. Yeah, that might go. Let's go 60. That'll allow me to play around with it a bit. Cool. So yeah, one of the things that I've kind of like noticed about, I guess, hanging out on YouTube and being on the internet for so long is that, and one of the reasons I wanted to sort of create a community and create a place for sort of artists to go and share their work and enjoy being an artist again is to kind of get away from a lot of the noise. And this really was the number one thing. I've noticed that, talking to a lot of people online, talking to a lot of students online, and just kind of seeing that the struggles that a lot of people are having is that, people have gotten really good at doing a lot of this kind of internet drama. And this is something I've sort of been exposed to a lot. Doing YouTube is just kind of how attractive that is to do. So this guy's going to be, I'm thinking, I want to make this sort of some really weird, kind of creepy creature, right? With like a weird sort of alien face or something. I'm still focusing on it and figuring out exactly what that's going to be. But yeah, I think it's so enticing, right? And we've gotten so good at doing drama. But what I've kind of noticed is, as fun as all that stuff is, it really is not going to help you get better at art, right? And the other thing that I've really sort of found, especially lately with a lot of sort of social media stuff, and I also count a lot of the people who, agitate drama on YouTube as sort of being part of this, which is like, I think that stuff's fun. It's got its place, but yeah, it really does sort of sap your energy. And the real problem with a lot of this algorithmic stuff that I notice is that a lot of social media just isn't serving artists, both in terms of like it not really helping us to, sort of get our work out there, and a lot of these companies seem like sort of very pro sort of AI. They don't really care about our copyright or intellectual property, right? It's kind of like unclear who owns the stuff that you're actually sort of putting up there. There's so many issues, right? And that's been around for ages, but really, I think the real practical problem is that we are just sort of so sucked into a lot of this drama that we literally just don't get to spend enough time doing art. And when the tide turns, right, like when the industries are booming, right, you get a lot of people being excited about careers and excited about everything. And then sort of when the general tone in the world shifts to being a little bit more negative, right, the economy is not doing so well, there's a lot of political problems, and all that stuff's real. But it means that typically what works better on social media and on YouTube and on all these things is like, it's the drama. It's the fear, it's the FUD, it's the uncertainty, it's like these headline style things. People talking about the industry collapsing and how it's impossible to get jobs and all this kind of stuff. And like, again, there's a lot of truth there, right? Like there's a lot of sort of truth there. That's all fair enough. I think the problem is though, like it's always been hard to get a job, and like 5 years ago when the industry was fine. I still, one of the things again, like if you're not quite sure on some of my background, I spent a lot of time teaching in a university environment at the concept design workshop in Adelaide, Australia, which is connected to a university. And this was a really good sort of fun thing. We managed to take a lot of good education and bring it to Adelaide, Australia, which is where I'm from, which is kind of like a nowhere state. It's a nowhere town, right? It's kind of like the equivalent of you kind of like fly over sort of states in Australia. No one really goes there. Nothing really happens there, which is great. It's a great lifestyle city. But there was no art education for me when I sort of grew up. There was nothing like that there, and I actually learned a lot being on forums. So being able to bring a lot of education, and we have like massive international guests and like really popular sort of artists. We sort of bring them to Adelaide, Australia, and we do workshops, and it's like really fun. So I did that for quite a while, and I have a lot of experience kind of essentially, the TLDR is mentoring students over this career thing, right? And taking people from like, literally I'm out of high school, I have no idea what I'm doing. Some people have, sort of more advanced drawing skills than others, but essentially kind of having to really orient people into the concept of what they kind of need to do in order to make a career out of art, or kind of like figure out what they want to do. And it's always been hard, right? Like it's hard then, even when the industry feels like it's sort of going well, like, it's still a challenging industry. It's still very tricky to figure out sort of where you fit, like what you want to do, what's going to work. Like it's always been challenging, right? And I think that when we kind of lean into FUD and we lean into a lot of the drama, if you're sitting there and you're kind of thinking about this as a career, or you just want to do it more, and also people who are like just coming out of these programs and they're kind of thinking like, I'm looking for a job, like this is really hard. Like it's always been hard. It was hard for me. It was hard. I've never known anyone. Actually, there's a couple of students who are like often really good, and they will sort of just get jobs pretty quickly. But like pretty quickly is not on the first day of sort of graduation. It often takes people years to really figure out like, like it seems to them that they had a lot more opportunity because their art was really good and whatever. But often it's that it just takes a while to like bake, to figure it out, to kind of figure out what you want to do. Right, there just is a challenge to this, and I think what I kind of noticed recently is that there's just so much FUD out there, especially with AI, especially with sort of industry stuff. Everyone who's sort of making content is kind of leaning into it because drama sells. It gets more clicks. It gets more sort of YouTube views, like Instagram views. Right, there's a lot of sort of stuff out there, and again, it's not to say it's not real, but a lot of what we're about is, that we are kind of what we focus on. And, I think if you kind of focus on that, that's what you're going to focus on, as opposed to kind of what the opportunities are out there, what's easier, what's better than it has been. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that you sort of can do, as long as we're sort of not all just doing this sort of doom and gloom stuff. And again, let me know in the comments down below whether that's sort of me being Pollyanna, but a lot of making products and making video games and things, a lot of it is actually about positivity, right? Like you kind of have to really believe in these bigger projects. You have to believe in your career. You have to, you're in quite a challenging industry. It takes a lot of commitment to these sort of larger ideas. And I think to a certain degree, you kind of have to be positive about it, right? And you have to sort of be hopeful that the projects you're working on are going to go well, that, the company you're working on for, right, is going to, do well, right? There's a certain degree to where like, this is a challenging industry. It's very sort of volatile. You need a lot of positivity, but it's also one of the most rewarding things you can do. If you do get a job as an artist, right, it essentially means you kind of don't need to retire. You don't need to think about like, when do I get out of this? It can be super rewarding. So anyway, the thing that I kind of noticed, and I sort of stepped away from social media quite a while ago, like in terms of me checking it and really sort of caring about it. And what I've always done with social media that I found really helped me, but is often hard to communicate to people who are starting out and kind of saying like, I need to get my work out there. I need to promote myself, right? I need to get on social media. Is that like, look, you really need to figure out this from a business stance, right? Like you need to figure out how these things actually serve you. You need to figure out which platform you want to go on and which industry you're in and how that industry functions from a business standpoint and where those people are hanging out and what they're doing and how to get their attention and how to network and like how your particular industry functions, which particular social media platform, whether that's like ArtStation, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, like Facebook, whatever it is, TikTok, like there's all sorts of different ways you can kind of make this work. But if you look at most, which I do, right, because I'm on YouTube, so if you're not aware, there's a lot of content on YouTube about how to do YouTube and how to succeed with your channel. You can buy courses, you can join communities, you can do a whole bunch of stuff to like figure out how your social media platforms kind of function. And the number one thing people say is like, you don't have to post on everything. You just have to figure out one that kind of really works for you, that you understand. And until you kind of really have that dialed in, there's no point in kind of being on everything. And I think it's a lot of success there is really just kind of understanding which, like sort of which one works for you. And it's going to be different depending on which industry you're in. So, I found, for instance, that the thing that really worked for me as a freelance artist, sort of 10 years ago, it always changes, was ArtStation. And I found like, if I just got ArtStation working, I had an unlimited amount of freelance work. Essentially, I was just constantly, people are still kind of, pinging me on ArtStation. I'm not, if you pinged me, apologies. I haven't replied for a while to any sort of messages there. I'm just sort of way too busy. But yeah, that was it. I didn't have a big Instagram following. I didn't have any sort of social media. I didn't have anything. I was just like, well, art directors are on ArtStation. That's kind of where I should go. So anyway, I think if you are kind of like thinking about this and you're sort of beginning your sort of journey and you're like, how do I get the word about my art out there? Like, how do I promote myself? We often kind of have this feeling that like we should be on social media and that we should be on everything, right? And I guess that's just not true. That's not good advice. And also that doesn't mean you should be on there all the time, right? Like sinking in and breathing in the drama and the tension and the distractions and getting sucked in by the algorithmic drama and all that kind of nonsense. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. The question is like, just how do we get away from that, right? Like, how do we avoid that? And so what I've been doing is looking at this idea of like more sort of private communities, and specifically in this case, like a private paid community, which is, it's not for everyone for sure. But what I kind of found is it's actually really good for this particular problem that we have where like there's lots of good things about social media. There's lots of good things about having apps where you can connect with other people and you can get to know each other and you can figure things out together and learn together. But those things they're not on Facebook anymore. It's not on these actual social media platforms anymore because they're just so noisy, right? And you kind of go there to learn about art and you just end up watching some, sort of viral video about some awful stuff that, just doesn't really serve you, or getting really upset about something that's kind of annoying. Again, that's what those algorithms are designed to do. So I was kind of looking at a lot of the different options and I just sort of got really into this idea. So that's probably like the first reason is I kind of have really felt for a long time that a lot of this social media stuff, a lot of the drama, the FUD, the sort of patterns that people are tending to get into online, it's sometimes it works for people, but for me, I really found it didn't. I really found my life was immensely better when I just kind of watched the things that I wanted to, and I kind of just stepped away and tried to sort of not get sucked into a lot of that drama. And it's kind of hard to stay away from that. So that's the first reason, right? Is just get away from the noise, the distractions, the headlines, the FUD, because when you're making art, it's really important to be immersed, right? And to fill your mind with art stuff. Like just be around people who are like doing art, thinking about art. And that's what, sometimes you get at a school, like going to a school, you kind of get that culture. You get a lot of that, that feeling, the hard work ethic, you hang around sort of entertainment design schools, you're hanging around teachers who are professionals. you know, they're all working hard, and you're kind of like, oh, I kind of get what I need to do, right? But it's kind of, again, it's really hard to sort of get that if you're just sort of hanging out online, being sort of immersed in drama. Yeah, and again, I've just found when you step away from that and just free your mind from all of that stuff and just immerse yourself in art, you just sort of naturally get better more. And when you hang around other people who are doing the same thing, you just naturally get better more. So yeah, I thought this was like an idea worth sort of exploring. The other thing that I've kind of really noticed that I wanted to sort of try and create a space for was that the fact that what I've noticed over 15 years of like seriously trying to get better at sort of teaching people and mentoring people how to get better at art and how to build a career and a lifestyle with this is that often the problem is not actually the skill, right? We often have this kind of feeling that our artistic skill is the thing that's holding us back. And look, it is, but also it's important to understand that the things that will probably really make your career sort of function well and will actually allow you to kind of do this for a living, or, you know, sell your particular sort of Kickstarter project you're working on. Like there's so many different ways to succeed and kind of work this. And even if you're just doing this for as a hobby, right? I really find the thing that is normally holding people back is actually like productivity. It's like building good habits and actually doing it and building like a foundation, not of art, but of making art, right? And figuring out what you actually want to do with your art. Because depending on what industry you want to get into, depending on the way that you want to make your art, what style you've got, so many of the things we actually do change. And what this means is that figuring out the productivity and figuring out what industry you want to get into, and a lot of productivity, what I classify there is like goals, right? It's like actually having solid goals, knowing where you want to go, knowing what you're wanting to do, being able to channel your energy in a really effective way. I kind of found that, you know, that was often the problem that a lot of students I sort of saw, and a lot of people I would mentor online, a lot of people who took, you know, the Line and Color Academy course that I sort of offer, has a lot of these things baked in. But what I kind of realized is like a lot of what I'm saying in the teaching, and you've kind of heard me say, is like, we need to actually just do work, right? It's not a matter of sort of studies and just constantly doing Loomis head studies for anatomy and doing all this kind of abstract stuff. That really the key is to do it and to figure out what you want to do and start doing it now. But again, it's hard to find a space to do that where you're around supported people. But yeah, this idea of productivity that I think is really important is something that's often missing. And it's hard to find places where everyone's interested in that. Everyone realizes that's a problem. You can go and talk to people who are dealing with those challenges of building artistic rituals and all that kind of important stuff. And it's just sort of something that is not talked about. Yet the other thing that I think is really important is that often there's not a great sense of business or marketing knowledge when it comes to artists. We're often told to, you know, not deal with productivity and marketing and business as artists. You know, we get sucked into thinking it's okay to have kind of artistic angst, and, you know, like that we shouldn't be productive and prolific, and that, you know, just being an artist is there's often something wrong with us, right? It's because we're all like emotional and sensitive and stuff like that. I just think like that's mostly just garbage. What I've kind of found is that it's just a matter of figuring out the right language to translate a lot of these things into, and find strategies and frameworks that actually kind of support artists. So the other thing I wanted to do was build a space where like it's not just a matter of like building better craft and skill, but it's also a matter of adding some other skills to create more of like a complete skill set. Because this is what I found really kind of helped people. And even in the beginning, if you're sitting there trying to figure out what to draw and how to improve your craft, right? Like if you're sort of thinking about this, like how do I kind of construct something, right? How do I think about the composition? How do I think about the process? Like for instance, my process that you see here is very much based on a comic book style. It's based on a comic book process. And that's because that's how I sort of learned to do art. But a concept artist, even though I have done concept art for quite a while, you know, I did concept art. I'm still essentially sort of employed as a concept artist full time, although I do a lot more lore building and writing, and I actually work on sort of comics in the current video game company job I have. But a lot of the process that you have as a concept artist these days is very different, right, to a typical comic book artist process. And so kind of like everything you do, everything you learn, the way you do it, the skills you learn, the things that are important to you, what you focus on, the emphasis you put on learning the fundamentals like perspective, anatomy, rendering, all these things are going to vary depending on what your outcome is. And, most comic artists can't do concept art, and most concept artists can't draw comics. It takes them a long time to kind of skill up and really figure out how to do that, right? Like how to actually cross those sort of industry lines. And the reason for that is, as I said, like a lot of what you need to learn in terms of your foundation is going to be based on the business you're entering, the career you're wanting, the focus that you're gonna want to achieve. And this is also something that I just don't see talked about a lot. So even if you're in the beginning, knowing where you want to go will really help you to figure out which foundational things you learn. And having a bit of an understanding of like how a particular industry works in terms of business, marketing, promotion, and having a good roadmap there will help you even at the very beginning. But it will especially help you when you're actually doing those things and trying to figure it out. And I find that often artists have a bit of like a toxic relationship to money and sort of industry and corporations and stuff. And it's hard for us to contextualize that. We're often torn between these feelings of like we should create art for free and we should be doing things for free, and because we're passionate about it, and capitalism is kind of bad. But on the other hand, everyone's sort of upset that these industries are falling and there's no jobs and no one's going to sort of support us, and this is sort of hard. And what I found is like just adding a little bit of business, a little bit of productivity, like a little bit of marketing knowledge to myself, like really sort of took my career to a good place. And that often the things that I was struggling with personally, and what I see people struggling with personally, is like not really understanding like how these jobs that they're after function, like where is the value you can provide. And often people do think that the value is in the art, right? Like if you're wanting to be a concept artist, for instance, people often think that like what I have to do is just get better at art. And it's like a lot of what you do as a concept artist, as a production concept artist, is deal with your art directors, the creative leads, the people who are above and below you in the production chain, right? People who are giving you jobs. And often the job is not just like, make this thing, make an awesome drawing. It's like, take an existing character that we've worked on for a different game because we have the animation rig. And what I want you to do is update it and change it so that it looks different, because that'll be effective from a monetary standpoint. And then what you have to do is like talk to the people below you in the production chain, like the modelers, animators, like riggers, and all those people, and just be like, can I add this? Can I add that? Right? It's not always, and the reason for that is like there's monetary constraints, and there's people you're working with, and it's complicated, and it's social. There's all these other things that are like, this is far more important if you actually want to get employed, to kind of understand how some of these things function. And what I think you find is that, we're not often served when it comes to even sort of thinking about that, or, like having a good plan for that stuff. So this is where, again, like having a good understanding of business, even if you're not wanting to, make your own artistic little sort of small business, which again, I think is another massive opportunity that people kind of have today that doesn't often get talked about. Or when it does, a lot of people, what they're suggesting is like you sort of sell brushes and you sell sort of training and stuff like that. But like not every artist can sell brushes and training, right? That's not a business model that's going to work. That's kind of like, it's a weird sort of Ponzi scheme style thing, right? Where like you take brushes and you learn art so that you can start a business selling brushes and teaching art, right? At some point, we have to figure out how to make products that people who aren't artists like, right? And a lot of that is like, as I've done quite a bit of, doing Kickstarter campaigns, like building board games, building tabletop games, making products, making comics, right? And making video games, right? As part of a big team. I think there's a lot of cool sort of opportunities there. But again, even a lot of those, they don't really get sort of talked about that much, at least that I see. Again, let me know if you've got some sort of good resources and things that you've sort of found for that. So anyway, what I found is like often really the skills we're trying to build as artists to build a good career are like, yes, they're to do with with making like cool art, and that's kind of what we're here for. But often the reason that you get employed is more to do with sort of production and in creating things. And so this is why, again, part of what I've tried to build inside this community, the Mighty Artisan community, is a space where we focus on sort of 5 separate skills, not just art and craft. And we try and think about different aspects to that as well. So the things that I really like to focus on are the craft or the skill, like just your raw drawing power. Like, here's a pencil, what can you do? But then there's also the creative process stuff that I think is sort of equally important. And this creative process stuff is like what I'm doing now. It's like, how do I get this weird idea I've got? And how do I get it down on the page? Now, depending on the skill set you have, right, you may have drastically different ways to make that happen. You know, some artists would start building this creature in 3D, you know, and they would mock it up. And then they just get this character, some female character. You get that from sort of Daz 3D, and you sort of mock that up and you build the whole thing. And you put it on Unreal or Blender and you kind of move around, and then you paint over it. Like, that would be the concept art sort of process, right? We've all got a different process that we use that's based on our creativity, our backgrounds, our influences, the kind of style we want to create, all the stuff, right? I'm sure you know, right? The creative process is very personal. But then you've got these other skills, right? So normally what we think of is those 2 skills as being, that's all we do as artists. And as long as we get those right, everything works. And it's like, that's true, right? If you are a really good artist, you understand how to make things, and you can kind of match that to the needs of a particular industry, like you're good, right? Like, you know, things are going to happen that are going to work out well for you. I mean, I really need to hustle with this. I'm talking way too much. Too much talking, not enough drawing. Tim. So the problem is, though, I think there's other skills. As I said, the number one thing that's often missing is productivity. Is like, how do you manifest your energy over time, right? Like, how do you figure out how to, even a lot of people I know who have jobs, right? They often, you know, they often want to work on their personal projects, right? Because again, you know, they're so mixed in production and doing their job well that, you know, they don't often get to make their art anymore. And it's challenging to figure out like how to do that. And a lot of students really struggle with this as well when you're kind of trying to figure out your folio, and it's like motivation, inspiration, like how to manifest your energy over time, so that you can create stuff, right? And again, not just so that you finally get a job and that's all over, right? Like, my experience is this never really goes away, right? We always need to figure out how to do these things and serve ourselves as artists. The other thing that I think is really key is, as I said, business. And this is where just understanding the basics, like when it comes to productivity in business, you don't have to become a CEO. You don't have to become a productivity nut. But if you just understand the basics, if you just understand the basics of ritual and habit and like how to build a good relationship with your art so that you're excited to sit down and be like, oh man, I can't wait to do this. Again, this is one of the things I spend a lot of time building, where, you know, sometimes I just like, I could play games, I could watch a movie, I could do this, or like I could spend, if a movie takes 2 hours to watch, or sometimes it's like 2.5 or 3, I feel like these days, I'm like, I could make some art. I could do this. Like, this will probably take me the same time as it would, you know, take to watch a movie. How much more fun is this going to be, right? And I think a lot of that is just basic sort of productivity knowledge. But when it comes to sort of business, I think, again, just a little bit will go a long way. Just understanding the basics of marketing, promotion. One of the things I might talk about that I've been talking about a lot when I'm sort of promoting the community is the concept of positioning. Just this simple marketing and business concept. I'll see if I can sort of go into it just briefly, if I sort of get a minute at the end of this. But just this one thing, like when I really understood this, I was like, oh, I kind of get why that didn't work and this worked and all this kind of stuff. But until that, you know, it often feels like you're sort of looking at this mysterious black box, right? And it's just so hard to know like why things are working, why things are not. So that's what I found is like often when it comes to getting jobs, like a lot of the reasons that we are succeeding are not because of art, but it's because we're helping the production chain, we're understanding. And a lot of that is just the business of it, right? Like when as a concept artist, you get good at like repurposing models and rigs and animation rigs and doing variations. But like if you're a concept artist and you can do this like really well, where you can take an existing model, an animation rig, and you can kind of just plus it by adding a couple of things, but it doesn't look like you've just added a couple of things. Like you really made that thing unique and interesting, and you've optimized the way that works with animation. Like that's when you have a job, because you're helping with the business side of it. And I think appreciating the business side of it is good, because a lot of artists are just like, oh, this sucks. I hate this, right? I just want to make my whatever character I want. And it's like, yep, I think we'll get there with technology where like you can make any rig and it just auto rigs everything. And, it's kind of pretty cool. But like often what we are getting paid to do and the value we provide in these companies is our ability to help with the bottom line, help with the business, help make the game better without spending heaps of money, right? And that's often our job as a concept artist, is to think through that. Like, what's a good idea I could have that would be effective and work well within the current technical limitations, like how can I push all of the technical limitations to the limit, and produce something that like is a player is going to look at and be like, wow, like I haven't seen that before. Like that's really interesting. And it doesn't just look like sort of cookie cutter stuff that often is there because of those technical limitations. So anyway, I find just like for me anyway, like sort of just thinking about a little bit of business and productivity has helped me a lot, right, in my career, doing things. And the last thing that I kind of really built this community around, and I'm sort of super excited, and I'll be talking about a lot of these concepts a bit more on the channel, because again, that's kind of where my brain is going a little bit more, sort of working on our own projects, doing our own things, and thinking about a little bit more of these kind of larger topics. The last thing is authorship, because I find like a lot, and again, like a lot of my friends are professional artists. I get to know a lot of students who they get jobs, right? And they're often, again, we often sort of don't view ourselves, even, I would say like even really successful artists and people who you'd think like, oh, surely they've got this figured out. They often don't feel as if they have the authority to actually kind of make stuff, right? Like we often don't feel as if we have the authority or the permission as authors to just make things. And I think often this is because, we don't feel as if we have like an adequate artistic voice, right? That we don't feel like we have that kind of stuff under control. And this is because, quite frankly, often when you're pursuing a job, what you're looking at is like, how do I provide value and make other people happy, right? Like, how do I make my editor happy? How do I do this thing? How do I get more jobs in illustration? How do I get a better job in video games, right? When you do that successfully, you think about other things. And we sort of lose touch with like, but I could make stuff. I could do this. And I think a lot of people starting out today in various industries that are like a little bit sort of, not in the best shape, just aren't seeing a lot of the possibilities you could kind of probably have to just do your own thing, right? If you just understood the basics of that. And what I find is like most artists actually have these kind of secret desires to do more of their own thing, right? Like a lot of comic book artists are like, well, I'm kind of doing this, but actually what I want to do is just do my own thing, right? And a lot of people that getting into video games are like, yeah, I'm getting into video games, but ultimately my desire is to sort of make my own video game, right? Be my own art director, do my own thing. And the reality is like no one's really stopping you from doing that nowadays, right? Like it's actually doable, and it's going to get more doable, easier. So anyway, I think there's just the concept of like getting used to thinking of ourselves as authors and as people who have permission, and it's okay to make things, right? And that's kind of okay. That's something that I think is also like a really important skill that again is often missing from a lot of the drama and a lot of the fuzz and a lot of the noise, right? Anyway, so that's like another reason why I was really inspired to try and create a space that kind of talks about those things, but not just that, but like trying to figure it all out together. Because the reality is often these things go together, like the skills you build, the techniques you build, the artistic craft you build, the productivity you build, the particular way you make things is very sort of industry specific. Right? It's very specific to the industry you're going into, the business model you want to have. For instance, if you are just going to make your own thing from day one, you probably would develop a very different creative process, right? You could essentially only build the craft and the skills and the style to support your work. You don't need to, do other people's stuff. You don't need to consider all that other stuff that I just said about working in a production with other people, because you're it. Again, so much of it is a matter of combining these things together and making them work for you, right? Building your own plan. It's not just here's a cookie cutter thing, you do this. It's like this takes experience and experimentation and time, right? And so one of the other challenges I've kind of had with sort of teaching and doing courses and classes and one-on-one mentoring and all these sort of different options is that really getting good at art takes time. It's not something that you can just get knowledge on. You need to get the knowledge, you need to get strategies, and especially this is the case for like productivity and business and all these things I've been talking about is, when it comes to your productivity and building a good ritual, it takes time. It's not like something where like you try it for a day and you kind of figure it out. I think like sort of by definition, what's happening is that you are practicing these skills and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And sometimes, you need to readjust and you tweak, and often like online courses are like quite good for some things, but they're really challenging when it comes to sort of building these kind of really sort of large, tricky skills where you're trying to integrate things. So again, that was another reason why I think like community style learning is actually a really good way to talk about these things and actually kind of develop these skills over the long term, because you have the time, right, in a paid community to actually kind of work on this stuff over the long term, not just kind of take a one-on-one mentoring or a class or something like that where you do it for a couple of months and like, it's super valuable. People get to know you, right? You get this sort of someone who really understands things and they can tailor a strategy to you, but then often it's over, right? And you've got to do another one in a couple of years. And often I think what we really need is to kind of adjust a little bit, course correct a little bit, go try something. You don't necessarily always need to take a giant sort of 30-hour course. You kind of often need to just say, here's like a little idea, go actually test it and see how it works for you, and then come back and we'll kind of talk about it, right? And then if you can talk about it with a whole bunch of other people who are doing it, to me, that is like one of the best ways to kind of actually learn, right? And not just learn, but with a lot of these concepts, it's not just some, the other thing is like when it comes to business, like one of the problems is like even just talking about business stuff on YouTube, the way I would sort of talk about it, like I don't think it would get many views. It definitely wouldn't get many likes and stuff, because if you look at what works, it's mostly the drama. It's mostly this is how you earn X number of thousands of dollars per month or per year or whatever. Here's my salary. This is how much I made doing this, or like I'm quitting my business or I'm starting my business, or like, it's the drama, right? It's to me, again, that the concept of like building a career or a lifestyle out of this is so serious. It is so particular and specific to what you want to do. And there are things that you can do that might make you more money in the short run. But again, it's not building the career you actually want to do. It's not building the lifestyle you want. It's not actually going to work for you over the long term. And this is like really serious, heavy stuff, talking about career, and you kind of actually have to make sure it works, right? You actually have to go and try it and try and build social media followings, try and build businesses, try and build ways of kind of making products that you like, or really try and go and say, hey, like, how do I get people interested in my folio, right? So I can get a job. I mean, this is really serious stuff. And I think it's easy for a lot of different, sort of courses and things to kind of basically be very flippant about that. And that's what I find a lot of the content on YouTube is alike. Again, let me know what your experience of this is, because this is just me, right? And the other challenge is, that again, it's good to be around people who are trying these things out and actually seeing what works and what doesn't, because the tactics change. Social media algorithms change, what works changes, industries change. What may have been a good industry for the last 20 years or 30 years may not be for the next 20 or 30 years. You've got to kind of figure out what works. And when everyone does figure out what it works, it's kind of obvious. But when you're in those transitions, frequently it can be super, super stressful and hard to figure out what's going on. So again, I think like the idea of community is a really good way to tackle some of these larger skills. So yeah, that was kind of, that was one of the main reasons why I was like looking at the way that we could build good situations where you can really learn these skills and learn to apply them and see if it actually kind of works for you, outside a traditional kind of one-on-one mentoring or sort of course system. And for that to be much more effective and essentially cost effective over the long run. So yeah, that was like another couple of reasons why I thought the idea of kind of starting a community was sort of really good, and sort of got me excited about the possibilities. And the other thing is, this is something that I think these things will become a little bit more popular over time. I'm probably a little bit early to the party here, but I think what's possible with these kind of different platforms where you can kind of just roll your own social network essentially, but define a lot of the rules and the culture and how it works. But you can really combine like the best of courses, the best of kind of live chat, the best of kind of like Facebook groups. You can kind of roll it all into one and really sort of customize it and figure out exactly what you want and build like a place that kind of really helps everyone. And it has all the cool stuff that you would get from social media, which is like, it's sort of super up to date. Like you can literally ask a question and there's a whole bunch of people who might be able to give you an answer like immediately. And, it also has like notifications and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, it's pretty cool what you can kind of do. And once I kind of saw that, I was like, how could we use this to get better at art and sort of deal with all of these challenges I've just been sort of ranting about? So yeah, if I sort of look at the kind of my experience, like how this kind of happened, I think that's sort of worth touching on because that's something I was sort of talking about in some of the material. And I think this concept of understanding a little bit of business and positioning and productivity and stuff is really good. So, if I sort of look back on my career, this is something I've kind of frequently talked to people about is in the beginning, I really just had no idea what I was doing. And I think like a lot of people early on, you're kind of like just, you're a leaf in the wind, just kind of blowing around. So, I did actually manage to get a job, but early on, and I got a job when I was sort of 20, 21, and that was really good. And I had been wanting to become a comic book artist. That's kind of what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know what I wanted. I just wanted a job, really. I didn't really care. I was not really thinking about it that much. I had no idea about business planning or career planning or like, how this might actually work. I was literally just kind of thinking, I just want to get paid to do art in some way. So I kind of transitioned to being a artist in video games. And the first job I got was as a texture monkey. And this was back on sort of PlayStation, I think like PlayStation 2 sort of days. Yeah, like 2002. It was that, like PlayStation 2 had kind of just come out, I think. I remember Metal Gear Solid had just sort of come out, and the graphics were like the PlayStation 2 Metal Gear Solid, and everyone was just like, oh my god, these graphics are like ridiculous. That was one of the first games where I think like the budget was sort of, if I'm remembering correctly, other people probably have better domain experience than me on this, but it was like a $30 million budget, right? And that seemed crazy at the time. So video games were pretty funky. Pretty clunky, and I was doing very basic sort of texture work in Photoshop for essentially first-person shooter levels, and it took me a long time to kind of get that job, and it took me probably like a year of kind of trying to network within a small city, trying to figure out how I could get my folio there, trying to figure out what they wanted, building the skills, and I kind of got a job, and that was good, and that kind of worked, and I thought at that point, like I got my foot in the door. It's all going to work, right? I just remember, like, I literally remember talking about like being in different scenarios and having like the world be turned upside down and all this kind of FUD. Like I remember I had actually applied for the job before September 11, and then September 11 happened, and when that happened, like you really were not quite sure what was going to happen with a lot of sort of American businesses and a lot of international trade. Like that was a major point of like, I don't know what's going to happen in the world. And a lot of the funding for those sort of games was obviously coming from American studios. And I had no idea. I was like, maybe this is the end of all sort of international problems, right? Everyone was like really terrified about what was going to happen at that time. And I remember just wondering, like, am I actually ever going to get this job? And I sort of did eventually, right? And that was one of the first jobs I got. It was awesome working on texture stuff that was super boring, but I just loved it. Anyway, the problem was I got fired from that job 6 months after, right? Because the entire Australian video game industry crashed. And all sort of went away pretty much. And by sort of 2008, sort of 5 or 6 years later, like it was pretty much all gone, right? Like all the big studios were gone. I mean, if you talk about the drama that's happening now, like with industries and job loss, like that is nothing compared to what happened to the Australian video game industry. Because again, if you understand a bit of the business, a lot of it was founded on the Australian dollar, US dollar exchange rate. So basically they were able to get sort of English speaking sort of people with a similar culture to do work for half the price, because the exchange rate was essentially half. So and the cost of living was probably about half. So yeah, you could employ a studio in Australia for essentially half the price, and everyone spoke English, so you weren't dealing with those outsourcing problems, which was much more of a concern in the late 90s, early 2000s. So when that sort of went away, when the dollar changed, all of the money went out of Australia, and again, there was a whole bunch of other problems, but this stuff happens, and all those studios went away, like all those jobs went away. Every studio sort of disappeared. Pretty much, right? Like, again, if you've been in Australian video games for that long, you'll be like, no. I mean, there's a couple of things that survived, but basically it was kind of scorched earth, right? Oh man, I need to draw this. Okay, let's draw. So yeah, that was one of these things where, I didn't really have any idea what was going on. I was kind of floating about. That kind of ended. And so I got my foot in the door, but that didn't mean that like I had job security. It didn't mean anything, right? It just meant that I had worked on games. And, I really sort of flailed around and struggled to kind of figure out another solution because there was no local work. And I wanted to become a comic book artist, and again, I had a whole bunch of different things. Eventually, I did get a job as a concept artist, as a comic book artist in the French comic book industry. But even then, like the problem was I was a professional, but I didn't feel professional because my productivity wasn't very good. And I was struggling with the deadlines. I was struggling to understand a lot of the business aspects of like why a particular pitch or book that I would be working on would get accepted or not accepted. And yeah, there was just a huge amount of challenges there where like, you would kind of imagine, and I think this is often, again, this is one of the fallacies that they talk about when you go to school and stuff, is they're kind of like, you just need to get your foot in the door. And once you get your foot in the door, you're inside. And it's like, that is not how business works, right? Like maybe if you have, a really sort of serious economy and there's like lots of opportunity and you're in a particular city where there's like heaps of different jobs in that industry, like maybe that kind of functions. But what I kind of found is like that is not necessarily true. You need to work on these other things and really have a strategy that works long term. So even after I'd finished a lot of my sort of professional comic book work, again, my career still wasn't really solid. It wasn't reliable. And it really was only understanding a lot of these different concepts of business and productivity, a little bit of marketing, and especially, again, the thing I like to talk about here is the concept of positioning and understanding how there are different artistic opportunities out there, and you can kind of take one sort of opportunity and it'll kind of work. But again, often where you'll find success is kind of really figuring out like, where is your little sort of niche? Like, where is your work really valuable? What are you really good at? What can you do that other people find challenging? And so what I kind of ended up doing was, transitioning from French comics, where I was sort of probably would have needed to do a bunch of things to really make that kind of career function optimally. But, I wasn't really standing out that much in that market because the reality is, my work just wasn't that unique in terms of French comics, right? I really liked French comics, but I feel like what a lot of people saw of me in French comics was that's just like all the classic French comics, right? It's like, I wasn't really adding much to that conversation. And it's very hard to promote yourself and market yourself if you have no idea how the business or marketing things function. You're just imagining, I'm going to make it a comic and I'm going to make the art really good and then everyone's going to buy it. It's like, that's not true. There's a lot of promotion, meeting your audience, building a customer base, building a fan base as a comic book artist. And that's the same in English speaking and the European, Franco-Belgian sort of markets and all the European markets and every market, right? It's the same with the authors and prose novelists, right? There's a lot of strategies there that are really important and really key. And I just had no idea about most of that stuff. So surprise, surprise, it was kind of like a bit of a struggle for me, right? Like it was, a lot of stuff was working, but also, it was not like everything was just amazing. But once I kind of understood that a lot of what I needed to do was kind of find particular industries where I guess my skills were more valuable. And to cut a long story short, what I kind of ended up doing was really kind of finding that in the concept art world, again, like my style, right, what I'm doing now is not traditional concept art work. It's not it's not the processes that other people were using. And because I was teaching at an entertainment design school, I knew exactly what people were doing. Like we would be constantly getting like the best artists on the planet come to Adelaide, Australia, teach you a workshop about insert cool sort of art process here. And I knew that a lot of people were using 3D in concept art. I knew that all those production processes were there. And I was like, well, I'm not like that. That's not what I do. But what I had was a English speaking ability, right? But I had a French comic book style that to a Western audience is much more unique because I was interested in like Hergé and Tintin. I'd been a fan of Asterix. I was like really into all the the old school heavy metal / metal hurlant artists, like Drolet, Jean Giraud, Mobius. And I just knew a lot about that. Like that's all classic stuff, right? Like that's nothing new. That's just old history to a lot of people in the French comic book market. Again, they still like it. But to the Western audience, that stuff's quite fresh. So to a lot of people who are trying to build games with different styles, my style was at the time, I guess, like a little bit more unique, and the number of people who are able to actually do that was probably far less. But because I taught an entertainment design school and I'd done concept art, I kind of knew the process. So I knew the process, I knew the way the industry functioned, but my particular artistic style and process wasn't typical. But I found that through positioning, and positioning is this concept of understanding on a marketing level how other people view you. Where are you positioned within the prospect's mind? And if you're running a business and you're an artist, you just have to understand, like, the customers are the people who pay you money, right? So if I'm a freelancer, my customers are art directors, right? Like, those are the people I serve. If I can make them really happy, I win. So a lot of success there is understanding what your position is within the mind of an art director, and how do you build that, and how do you make that clear. And what I found is, like, if I kind of, and it took me a long time. Again, this is not like, oh, I just sort of figured this and you flick a switch, but like understanding this, massaging this, working this, what I sort of found was that, like, as I kind of worked on these concepts and like built a few different sort of abilities and ideas here, I found that the skill set I did have that was useful in comics, in concept art and video games, was I had a style, and a lot of video games do want a style. And while the style that I was drawing in for most people wasn't actually what they were going to make the game look like, that I could draw scenes like this. So in comics, one of the skills you build that's specific to that industry is, as I said, going to be specific to that industry. So in French comics, is very different to Western comics, but in French comics, you have to draw backgrounds all the time, basically on every panel, right? It's just expected. It's just part of the job. It's part of the business. It's not like you can just draw someone sort of punching, on a cover and that'll work. It's like these are much more different style of art. So I found that just naturally my skill set included something that a lot of concept artists struggle with, which is drawing scenes exactly like this, where it's like, from a concept art perspective, I have a scene. It's a fantasy scene that doesn't exist. I'm able to design the creatures. I'm able to place it in the world. I'm able to have those designed creatures and sort of place it in a composition and create scenes and create multiple scenes. And I could do them really quickly because as a comic book artist, you also have to do things quickly. So I kind of had this skill that was actually quite valuable for some people working on some video games. And the more I kind of tried to advertise that and essentially position myself within the market based on the things I would post on ArtStation, I found that, like, the more traction I got and the more people who were like, oh, that is actually what I want, and the number of other people who could do that was much less, because again, I had a very unique skill set. So again, that's like a long way to go to kind of say that the concept of like thinking about how you fit into an industry and how you build your position within a marketplace is very key. And I think often what people struggle with is just very commodified positions within a marketplace where there's not much unique about your work or your skill set. And therefore you're competing with a whole bunch of other people on, these kind of very base metrics. And that can be very challenging, right? So a lot of success there is understanding like what your natural proclivities are, what you're good at, where you fit in, what skills you already have. And when you're thinking about transitioning careers, again, it's all the same thing. So that's an example of how, like, a really simple thing, like if you think about the concept of positioning, this is a pretty simple idea to understand. You can read a book about it. There's literally a book called Positioning. It's like a classic marketing and business book. And it explains it in really sort of detailed nature with case studies and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of other insight into that concept that's really good that will apply if you think about this. That's an example of where, like, that's honestly the thing that probably took my career and my income ability to a whole new level and gave me a lot of other opportunities. So again, like, that's a good example of how, like, a little bit will sort of go a long way. I think here I'm gonna have to like hustle with this thing if I'm gonna sort of finish it. Let's see if we can do some sort of finished lines. So I've got a couple more things we can sort of talk about here. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below, right? Like, whether that sort of idea resonates, like what your struggles have been in terms of either changing your career, like building your career, contemplating this. There's so many challenges when it comes to being an artist, right? I really feel like the danger and the problem is that we put so much of ourselves into our art that kind of if you are just kind of doing commodity art, or you're doing something you kind of don't really want to do and it's not really serving you, it's a little bit more challenging than some other industries, because if you're kind of not emotionally invested, we often don't make good art. And often what will make you sort of successful in a lot of these different careers is being able to kind of match your proclivities and the natural things that inspire you to the job, because then you can actually do it and put in a lot of energy, right? And it doesn't feel as if you're kind of cutting against the grain. All right. I'm going to have to, as I said, start to actually draw this thing. So yeah, here I'm just working on that sort of drawing. We're about an hour in. I have, again, as a target for this, probably, see, again, I'm probably targeting like 2.5 hours. That's probably my goal. So let's see if we can. I'm just going to double check this because I feel like maybe this, boom, maybe this torso is like a bit big. Not exactly sure. All right. Boom. Yeah, that feels a little bit better. It's just like a little bit. Yeah, a little bit like that. All right, I think I can make up the rest along the way. I might take a short break and I'll come back, and yeah, we'll finish this off with some lines and color. Okay, I'm back. I thought I'd just show you this platform because, again, a lot of people might just be wondering, like, what are you talking about? What community platform? It's pretty cool what you can do these days. So this is the mighty Artisan platform, and it basically just combines kind of Facebook groups with Discord style chat, and it also has like a lot of course ability sort of built in. So we can kind of do heaps of stuff to kind of just share our work, like talk about art, and also, you know, provide sort of training materials, mini courses, frameworks, etc. So for instance, here's a cool sort of post that Nate Trapnell, who's, again, one of the artists who kind of ages ago took my Line and Color Academy course, and has been doing really cool stuff, sort of building his own sort of comic book worlds and building up his folio. And again, he's just kind of talking through and sharing like his adventure and his kind of like journey developing this kind of comic book world. But yeah, there's kind of, we have sort of challenges and a whole bunch of other things. I'll go into it in a little bit more detail, but in case you're kind of wondering, like, what am I actually talking about here? Yeah, it's pretty cool what you can sort of do these days when it comes to, you know, the different technology, different platforms that are available. But yeah, it's kind of a mix of Facebook style groups, Discord style chat, and sort of courses essentially. And we just kind of mix all those things together, and it's a really fun way to kind of hang out, share work, learn, like do a whole bunch of cool stuff. So anyway, in case you're wondering, like, what am I actually talking about? And the other thing is that the cool thing is, again, you can sort of just access it on your phone, like you would sort of a normal kind of social network, etc. So yeah, it kind of has the best of all of those things, I think, without any of the noise, distractions, ads, and all of that kind of garbage. All right, I have to draw this thing. I have to get going. So this is what I like to call the kind of tracing paper over the top. And then what I'm going to do is pick an actual brush. Where are we? I have like a million brushes here. And this is also one of the things that I find is like sort of super interesting. Like, if you kind of listen to me talk about the Line and Color Academy, my sort of general thesis about sort of art and art styles and, how a lot of this works is, I think a lot of the discourse online is a matter of making it feel as if we need more complicated techniques. Like there's so many different things you need to learn. Again, it's all like 3D, different brushes, new programs, new apps, new styles, new processes, new techniques. It's always something kind of new. I find like the best thing to do is just to really focus on creating very simple, reliable processes and making sure you can actually produce stuff kind of on time, right? A lot of what is going to make your work better and more sort of it's going to build your career forward is just being sort of reliable, understanding whether or not you can kind of complete stuff in time. And a lot of that just comes from not necessarily making everything kind of new and fancy, but just getting the basics working, right? Like just having the basics sorted and then focusing on the ideas, focusing on those other aspects, like the business aspects, the productivity aspects. It's often those things I think that are holding us back, as opposed to what's the next brush set, what's the next kind of thing I can do, what's the next thing I kind of have to learn. A lot of it is just applying very basic ideas and technologies and processes and concepts that have kind of been around for like 100 years, 200 years. None of this stuff is new, right? And one of the other challenges with, I guess, our lot as artists today is the kind of information is out there, right? The information for how you could become an artist, like what process you should use, like what brush you should use, how to incorporate, as I've sort of been talking about, things like kind of 3D into your process. This information is kind of out there, right? Some of it's free, some of it's paid. I often, like courses, right? I mean, one of the reasons I sort of teach courses and make courses and do this stuff is like, for me, that's like a way better way to learn these things, because you don't have the distractions of, again, something like YouTube where we're doing a tutorial like this and then you've got all this other stuff kind of going on. It's a lot easier to kind of focus when you just kind of doing one thing, or at least that's what I find. But you can get so much of it for free, right? That's kind of what we're doing here, right? It's like, hey, you want to learn how to, from start to finish, in a couple of hours, complete a sort of scene in a comic book line and color style, like, let's do it, it's fun. The problem is that, again, like that's not just the challenge, right? The challenge is figuring out how do you apply that stuff? How do you integrate this stuff? Like, how do you actually make this work with your style? And then, depending on what you want to do with it, whether it's comics or concept art or illustration, how do the specifics of that function? And, getting critique for that, getting support for that, being around other people who are sort of dealing with those same challenges. It's not really like an information problem at the moment. I think it's really just a focus problem. And what I find is, actually, like it's a problem that there's so much information out there because it's just overwhelming, right? It's hard to know what you should actually focus on, what you should actually be doing, because there's so many different options, right? There's so many things you could be doing. So this is like often, I think, one of the things as well that like community can solve, and especially having a place like away from the noise can solve, is that you can actually be around people who are doing this and look at strategies for how to do this, and you can try it and you can show it to people, and just all that kind of stuff that you would probably get from like a more sort of typical university style education. But this way, again, it's not necessarily something where you have to go and do that whole thing and pay all of that money and spend all of that time. And the other thing is, as I said, often like developing these skills takes time. Like even for a university style course, that's like 3 years, 4 years, depending on what the schedule is. And often students aren't ready for that. They're not ready. They're not industry ready after that amount of time. There's, even though they've learned a lot of craft, it often doesn't mean everything is kind of connected together. Maybe they need to kind of integrate a lot of the technical skills they've kind of learned, really figure out how it applies to different industries. You kind of have to maybe do some of that networking. You have to figure it out. You have to build your presence. Like a lot of artists that I find, and I think, like just before sort of Christmas, there was again, local school that I used to talk at and teach at. They had a student graduation thing where like it's a gallery show. Here's what everyone's sort of been working on. And like what you find is, there's heaps of good stuff there. There's heaps of people who are super excited. I think, that's like a really good way to kind of learn these things. But still the problem that a lot of those people face is that, you've kind of just gotten your skills up to a point after 3 years of study or 4 years of study where like, oh, I kind of think suddenly maybe I am ready for this. But then you still have to like build a portfolio often with like your best work and then tailor that portfolio to a particular industry. Because often, again, it takes people a while to kind of figure out, okay, what do I want to do? How am I going to do this? What's happening? And yeah, it's often only after, doing those kind of final big projects and like really talking to other people. And again, maybe you take a workshop with someone and you're like, oh man, that industry seems really cool. It just takes a while to like really figure it out, right? And take all of that stuff to a really good place. And, it often takes, what I found is it takes a couple of years after people graduate to really be like, and then I finally got that job, like finally I figured out even what I wanted to do. And, I got people to, commit to me and take me on that first job. And then what you find is that even after that, people find it very challenging. One of the things I would spend a lot of time doing is talking to students who had already graduated, right? Like we're just doing this because we got to know each other and they're looking at getting jobs and often they find it really challenging, right? Because they get a job and then, as I said, like you get your foot in the door and it's not always over, right? You kind of need this stuff over the long term. It's sort of really challenging to make a lot of these things just kind of appear and happen instantly. And you do need to commit to these things over the long term. Often I think one of the dangers we make as art, one of the dangers and one of the things that we often do is kind of just keep flip-flopping around and changing our goals and kind of you do kind of get to a point you're like, well, I've kind of, my folio is not quite working yet. Maybe I'll just learn something new. And often what we actually need to do is just commit to the process, really kind of figure out how to improve our message, and all these kind of things that, I just don't feel like they often prepare us for in school. And I think that's where, having a kind of community can really help you with that, right? Again, the nuances of developing a process, of figuring it out, of like handling different career options and just sort of struggling with these things over the long term, right? Even when you do have the best schooling in the world, right? It still takes a long time to fully kind of bake and really kind of figure all this stuff out. Or at least that's what I found. Again, let me know where you're at with your career, right? If you're sort of just at the beginning, whether you're like, this is a complete pipe dream, doom and gloom, it's all kind of FUD, whatever. Like I'm super keen to hear where everyone's at with this. But yeah, certainly, got bigger brush there. Certainly this is, it is just a challenging thing. It takes a long time. And I think, again, from my experience and what I'm sort of interested in is looking at how community can kind of help us do that over the long term, so that it's not something where you just do it for a couple of months and you kind of get a couple of ideas. It's something where we kind of build on these things over the long term and really figure out how to make that stuff happen, which is immensely challenging, right? Also challenging to think about, like, what is the best way to do this? How do we do this? What's the best educational model? Like, for me, I'm like, what would help people more? Like, make more courses, do one-on-one mentoring, do coaching, group coaching, cohort-based courses. Again, there's like so many things we can do to kind of develop these skills, and I've had a lot of experience doing it. But I really think the idea of community is something that sort of helped me to learn early on in the early sort of days of the internet, where we had really cool sort of art forums and things. But yeah, it's so noisy out there these days, right? A lot of the sort of free art groups, I just haven't had much luck with them, right? Maybe that's something where that sort of really works for you, but I've sort of struggled to get a lot of value out of the ones that I've sort of joined over the years. So yeah, anyway, I think like one of the other things that would be sort of good to talk about is often how these things kind of go together, right? Because I think this is often where people are a little bit confused, and especially early on when you're looking at different career options and the way that those sort of different things function. So one of the things I like to do is try and break down, again, these different sort of skills that we actually need to build and kind of look at, okay, depending on which career you want to go into, I think that's my foreground. I think I might need a couple of more sort of foreground bits. Let's see if I can add a bit of stuff here. Yeah, I find that completely lost my train of thought there because I got distracted by art. But yeah, often in the beginning when people are like thinking about, okay, I want to go into a particular industry, I want to do a particular thing, there's these kind of different skills you need to build. And I think often what people just imagine, as I said, is that it's just the art, right, that matters. And I think that the reality is that what really will kind of help is understanding those other ancillary things that go along with a particular career. So one of the examples I really like to talk about and go into depth with is the different ways that your craft, your process, your productivity, business, and your consideration of authorship, how that will be very different depending on what career you choose. And you kind of have to know yourself a little bit, and you have to understand the skills that you're probably going to build, the type of career that's actually going to be. And you kind of have to have a good picture of that before you actually start and really kind of think about how to build those things. So one of the examples I like to give to kind of help make this real, right, is the difference between a concept artist and a comic book artist. And as I've sort of talked about, these are things that I've had a lot of experience with myself. And it's been really interesting to see the differences between those industries. So if we think about there being, for me, again, that I kind of easily can identify these kind of 5 separate skills that I think are good to think about: craft, process, productivity, business, and authorship. If you look at a concept artist, right, the craft that you typically build for being a concept artist is a lot of design craft. It's a lot of, in terms of process, like letting other people into your process, right? Like doing thumbnails, doing little bits and pieces, experimenting, playing around with different thumbnails, different options. And, that's been drawn on the wrong thing. Oh, that's annoying. Oh yeah, there we go. Let's see if I can get rid of that. All right, increase the opacity of that. We'll select this. Give me 1 sec. I gotta fix this. This is often what happens. Let's make a new one. Let's get rid of that. Let's reduce the opacity there. All right, I'm going to isolate this. We'll go into channels. We will select the black. Let's go back to layers. No, I don't want to watch a quick tour. Thank you very much. I'm going to invert that selection. I am going to make a new layer, and then I'm going to fill it with black, and hopefully that should give me, all right, some new lines. There we go. Boom. Fixed. Disaster averted. All right, let's actually make a new layer then. Boom. All right. Cool. So if you think about concept art in terms of the way that we develop craft, right? It's not necessarily like the way you would, for instance, learn anatomy to be a character concept artist. And the different craft skills that you would learn would probably be different depending on whether you are a character concept artist, a creature concept artist, creature designer, an environment artist, a prop designer, whether you would do kind of more like storytelling or keyframe illustrations. There's a huge variety of different things you would do in the concept art field, for instance. And different people specialize in different things. Some people are much more like, here's the big ideas. Some people are like, here's the production level concept art. There's all sorts of different things you could do. But you're often going to be much more specialized, right? From a craft perspective, that's important to understand. And the other thing that's like good to know is that often like that's also going to change depending on what kind of style you want to build. Like what type of concept artist do you want to be? What types of industries do you want to work in? Where it's mobile games, where it's like super stylized. Again, it's going to change the types of concept art you would do, the processes you would use, depending on your big studio, like large studio. But fundamentally, for instance, one of the things that people often misunderstand about concept art is like you're probably not learning anatomy in order to draw like kind of drastically different poses, because often what we do is just draw fairly static poses. You do need to pose your character like and make sure they have personality, and you need to be able to adjust the anatomy in terms of adding extra kind of structure or different builds, so being able to, from an anatomical perspective, make someone like very muscly or have a different body composition is super important, because that's often what we're doing. We're like, this character has this particular anatomy, they have this particular feeling. It's these subtleties we're trying to communicate to the people who are modeling things, right? But you don't really need to know how to draw people from different angles, for instance. If you're just doing character design, it's just not that important, right? It's just not really going to move the needle much. Like, it's good to have, and some concept artists are like really good artists, like they just in general have like excellent craft, and they do study life drawing, and they have, just a desire to push things forward. But for every one of those, there's probably like at least 10, 20, probably like 50, maybe 100 other concept artists who are like, I just do the job, right? And they're not that interested in that stuff, right? Because again, they're doing their job, they're providing value, they're making better games, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's just one of these things that we often don't understand, is like the skills that you will learn, like the craft you'll learn as a concept artist is very specifically geared towards creating rough work. So, you probably won't ever create a lot of finished or polished work. And a lot of what concept artists do is we try and make sure that we can create work that kind of feels more polished than it is. So, a lot of concept artists, for instance, are very frustrated because, they never get to build their illustration skills. We often never get to really, like finish art. And you kind of have to understand that that's kind of your lot in life, is never really finishing anything. And those are the skills that are important to build, So a lot of people and a lot of students early on sort of get into these things, and they're like, I want to be a concept artist. I need to build my foundation, that means I need to do this and this and this. And they're kind of often missing the key skills that are actually going to make you succeed in that industry. Now, we often have a desire and a drive to learn like an infinite number of things as an artist, right? But the key is, like, when you're thinking about this from a career perspective, it's often a matter of like, what are the skills that will get me hired now? Because if you can sort of get employed as an artist, it's one of the best ways to improve, because you get to spend more time doing art. So you're just naturally improving. Now, obviously, there's challenges to that, right? And, people often struggle to find the time and the energy and the focus to like improve their anatomy, improve their ability to draw characters from different angles, right? And because you're not doing it in the job. But in general, it's a lot easier once you are doing things professionally to improve naturally, because you're just doing it all day and you're sort of immersed. So often the first goal is like to actually get employed, right? Let me know whether that tracks for you in the comments down below. But that's often one of the things that everyone's wanting to do, right? Is like, just get me a job, right? So often the question becomes like, what are actually the skills that are needed to make that happen? And I think in terms of skills and craft, like what you're always doing rough work, you're always doing ideas. You need to be good at coming up with ideas with your art and your style and your process, and everything kind of becomes much more geared towards ideation, towards coming up with interesting solutions to problems. And often, it's just a lot of like all day, every day drawing characters from the same angle, right? Often based off the same base anatomy, or taking 3D models that someone else has done and kind of moving them around. And once you understand, like, again, that's really the skill, then it sort of changes your whole approach to everything. So again, I feel like that's something that's often worth sort of talking about, that, sometimes doesn't get enough attention is that, as a concept artist, that's what you're dealing with. So if we kind of keep going down the stack, again, you see that like process, for instance, is often something that's highly collaborative. You need to have a collaborative process. You need to have a process that supports the idea of iterations and changing things and modifying the design. And this is why it's good to not do what I'm doing as a concept artist, because it's very hard for me to like change little subtle things. But if you're working in 3D, if you are working in 3D plus paint, if you're doing photo bashing, whatever, like it's very easy to just be like, oh, I'll just kind of like smush this around with like a smudge brush and kind of like adjust it and tweak it and then like polish it. And if someone says, like, oh, can we try some options? It's very easy to kind of paint over it. As a line and color artist, that's immensely challenging to do and often like extremely frustrating to do. Like sort of as someone who's, doesn't have like a concept artist focused style. But again, I have developed processes and things to make that kind of possible with the style that I use. In terms of your productivity, often what you're trying to do is work with teams and you're trying to meet sort of intense deadlines. So one of the things you kind of end up doing a lot as a concept artist is just constantly trying to sort of make your art look good with, very short time frames, right? Like that's what it's all about. It's all a matter of sort of adding little bits of polish. But you're also, from a pure productivity standpoint, you're often dealing with other people who are actually managing your time. So frequently you're dealing with project managers or external deadlines that are other people are going to help you manage. People are going to track your progress, right? Even if you're a freelancer, you're probably going to have deadlines and things that are externally imposed. If you're working internally, you're going to be dealing with task management software. That'll be part of their sort of production. You've got sort of asset lists and deliverables, and a lot of that stuff is kind of organized for you, right? Is the point. It's you're not the one who's going to organizing it all. You're not task managing or tracking it. But you need to understand how that stuff functions and, how those project management tracking software systems function and, how to sort of integrate with them. And you have to be kind of able to keep up with that and be honest as well. Like a big part of that is understanding how long your process will take, whether or not you are going to meet that deadline, right? Because you can easily sort of renegotiate those things if you kind of get to it early. So it's just a very sort of particular way that you're going to sort of deal with productivity. If you look at the business concept of being a concept artist, this is where, as I've sort of touched on before, you're probably going to get a lot more traction by, kind of building those skills, right, that are actually going to serve the production chain, obviously. And like understanding what's going to work there and how to communicate that to the people you're working with and the people who are going to hire you, that you understand those things. It's building a folio that tells people you understand the nuances of production, that you've either worked on stuff or you just kind of get the basic idea. The way that tends to work, though, is you're really looking for a very small number of people to kind of hire you. And the way that business will typically work when it comes to concept art is you're kind of after credits on a really good project. If you can get some good credits on like a good AAA game, that's often where like your career is kind of sorted, right? Like if you're the person who designed a particular thing, or even if you were just in any way, shape or form associated with one of these projects that is really big, then often that's your ticket, right? And that ticket lasts for a long time, right? Like maybe indefinitely. But you're also dealing with a very small industry where like personal networking will often be the thing that will get you new jobs. And while sort of social media presence and branding yourself is valuable, it's really not the thing that's going to matter, right? As I said, like for every artist who you see online who's a concept artist who's like quite prominent and everyone's like, oh, I love their work. There's a whole bunch of others who like you never heard of, but they're really good and, they're highly employed, right? Because again, a lot of it is just networking, getting to know people. And you're really often after, freelancing is different to being a in-house person, but you may only have like a couple of jobs or companies that you work with over your career, right? And in terms of like figuring out like what's going to work, it really is a matter of you also presenting and being good to work with on a business standpoint, right? Like being personable, like working on your ability to communicate with people. A lot of these interviews now for like big AAA games and stuff, it's this classic thing where like you just go hang out with the team for 2 days and kind of if they like you, then they employ you. And if they don't, they don't, because you're working with people on creative projects and you're going to have arguments and discussions and creative things, and people want to kind of like hang out with someone who's interesting and who you kind of like the same things. Like that's far more important than do you have like 50,000 followers on Instagram, right? Because people have actually got to deal with you day to day. It's not a popularity contest on the wider world, but it is a popularity contest inside that company. And so like figuring out how to present yourself and be good when you work on those things means that, you know, you're probably going to get sort of employed and hired later on. And, you know, like hopefully that should be kind of obvious, but it's often these things that you're looking to build and present and talk about is like what you're looking for is that some art director is going to see your Instagram profile and that they're going to see not just your art, right? Because that's probably going to be handled in a folio, but even though your presence online is not something where the popularity matters to an art director, they are interested in who you are. And if you really come down to it, they're going to want to meet you. They're going to want to talk to you if this is a one-on-one sort of, if you're actually applying for a studio job, and they're going to want to know who you are. And if you can present yourself as like, hey, I'm just like a reasonable human, like that's going to make a huge difference, right? If you have special interests and those other people in the team are interested in those things, like that'll help, you know, and it'll help you enjoy that job. But what you're really after is like good team fit and something that can maybe last you for a long time. You know, often these jobs will last, like sometimes it doesn't. Like again, it was 6 months for me, but sometimes people can work in these things for like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And often what you're looking for is a good fit that'll kind of last you over the long term. And that's what sort of really matters, is understanding the business of the game you're working on, the business of the industry, networking with key individuals, building good relationships with people you do work with, because you never know who's going to be an art director or a lead on a different project 15 years from now. And you're really looking for like intense networking in a very small community. And that's what will make you succeed over the long term. It's often hard to see that when you're in the beginning because you're just like, just give me a job, any job. But it's often those things that will make the difference. And that's not to say I'm that good at any of that stuff, right? But that's what will make the difference. So if you look at authorship, this is also where if you're trying to become a concept artist in games, one of the things you kind of like have to understand is that you don't get to do much authorship, right? This really isn't about your ideas. It's about other people's ideas. And I think that the sooner you kind of get on board with that this is collaborative, it's like highly collaborative. It's really about you engaging and being hyper interested and being able to like shift and move with how the project functions. And in terms of authorship, what you might have is like, again, like your ideal scenario is you get a job and you work in games for 10 years at the same company. And probably you'll be working on a couple of games over that time, right? Like you can easily not actually work on that many projects, but be working as a professional for long enough to really like solidify your style. And often what you find is like artists take on the style of the project, and we're actually told that like your style isn't that important. What it's about is matching the style of the project, right? Being able to create work based on the brief of the art director, fit into that world and figure out how to iterate and add your own personality and your own touch to it. But there's an art to it. It's not really about you. Again, unless you get to sort of a much higher role, but even then, it's often not about what you're doing. There's so many stakeholders. You're really trying to add your creativity and your skills as much as possible, but it's in service of a larger goal, of a larger project. And that can be really fulfilling if you like working in a team, if you like other people. If you want to do your own thing and sort of tell your own story, though, it can be a nightmare. So it all depends like what you want and what will make you succeed. So if we look at, again, hopefully you can understand how those kind of skills, the skill, the process, the productivity, the business, the authorship, when you're looking at going down a particular career road, or even if you're just considering it, it's good to look at how all of those different things function and how you could become good at all of them. And how even when you're just starting out on your journey, you could think about the different pathways that you have and the different skills that you might need, because that'll actually help you early on. Because often you do need to build networks and build relationships and understand what you're actually doing within a job while you're training to do it, and looking at what are the things that are really going to help you to succeed. And often what you find is, like, again, the way that, you will find professionals, right? Like, professionals are often like, they're in teams and there's a small network of people. And if you are at one of these networking things, like a workshop, like these things we're running, or you go to one of these expos or something, or conventions, and you meet someone and you just present yourself as like a reasonable human, and they can kind of tell that you're good at art, like, that can be the difference. They'll be like, you're looking at a bunch of people, like, I remember this person that I met and they seemed legit. Go see their folio, they follow you. Like, so it can often be like you're looking for like one or two good relationships, but honestly, the way you present yourself as a human, I think, is really important. Anyway, let's contrast that to comic book artists, because this is often where people are like, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. The number one thing I see a lot of people say is like, I'm not sure what I want to do with my art, with my career. And I think one of the things, again, I'm really interested in solving through community over long term is trying to get some good frameworks for how we can think about this, how we can build these different skills. And often people will ask me and they'll just be saying, hey, I'm kind of interested in like concept art or comic book art. And I'm like, not quite sure. And I'm like, well, what are you basing the decision on? Is it just the art? Is it just like what art you think you want to be doing? Is it just because everyone likes games and everyone likes comics. Most artists like some comics and like some games, right? It's not a matter of what you like. It's a matter of like what you like doing, what your skills are. And so I think it's good to have more nuanced conversations about this. And then when you have a whole bunch of people who kind of know where you want, and even within the community right now, this is something, again, I'm just kind of like launching and starting and kind of doing the first sort of induction on. There's a lot of people who are already professionals, right? But they're professionals in one field and they're wanting to skill up or change profession. They're wanting to build more sort of personal project skills. And that's something we're kind of working on. You can get sort of actual feedback from people who are maybe doing that job, right? Or they'll kind of be able to give you a vibe for what you kind of need to do. And I think, again, these things are nuanced and they change and they vary depending on which industry you're in. Anyway, if we look at the difference between that, which hopefully is like a clear picture. Again, let me know if you are a professional concept artist, like, does that track for you? Have you thought about that? Maybe you're already a professional concept artist and you haven't quite figured out that maybe getting better at some of those skills, maybe presenting yourself online in a different way, that maybe that is going to be the thing that allows you to get that better job, right? And get to that point where you're like, I worked on this game, and so therefore, like, here's my ticket, and you can keep punching that ticket for the next 20 years, right? Because again, that's often, that from my experience, that's been one of the major things that will kind of help you. Anyway, let's look at the difference between that and a comic book artist. So a comic book artist, and again, I'll use this sort of Western comic book artist style thing. Oh man, I need to hustle on this. This is like taking way longer, which is, again, no surprise because I'm blabbing. So like, your typical sort of Western comic book style of career, right? I think is like a very sort of particular thing. It's a very sort of interesting industry to sort of be in. And really a lot of what you're kind of looking at there in terms of craft is the ability to draw story, right? Like sequential story, understanding shot design, composition, cinematography, which again is probably not something you would ever do as a concept artist unless you're doing keyframe illustration or specific storyboarding or something like that, or you're working with a cinematics team. But yeah, like, it's all about story. Comics are about storytelling, story, how to think about narrative structure and characters. So yes, you need to learn anatomy. Yes, it's really important to be able to draw characters from all sorts of different angles. Often comic book artists, though, don't really draw that many different varieties of people, right? To the degree where like a lot of their characters actually look exactly the same. I often like to say that in terms of like thinking about building your craft as a designer, a lot of comic book artists seem to be sort of like the Wes Anderson style, where like, if you know like a Wes Anderson film, right? Like the Darjeeling Limited. Again, I'm blanking on all the other kind of Wes Anderson films, but they all basically have like Bill Murray in them. They always have the same sort of cast of characters. And that's kind of how you are. That's how a lot of comic book artists are. It's like I've got this like group of actors that I use to make every film or every comic I create. And like, here's the big tough kind of hero guy, and here's like the, sort of like hot girl, and here's like the nerdy guy, and here's the, big sort of monster guy, and here's the bad guy. And it's like, it's kind of the same people, right? And that's fine. That's all you need to do. You often don't need to draw the whole scene. You need to draw everything. And it's far less about you collaborating with other people. So the skills you're building are much more narrative, story-based, they're process-based. In terms of the style you develop, you really only ever need one style, and you only ever really need one process, right? So unlike sort of concept art where we're constantly building and changing styles and processes, with comic book art, your style is you. It is your personality. It's kind of everything. It's like all that matters. It'll make or break you, essentially. And I think that's just really important to understand, like the distinction, because that's like a very different way that you live, right? That's a very different way that you breathe every day. It's a different thing you focus on. And in comic book land, often if you do steal someone's style, it's like, it's a big deal, right? It's like, oh my God, so-and-so is like copying, they're just a pastiche of this other artist, Whereas in concept art, that doesn't matter, right? For comic book artists, that does matter, right? The style is important, but you see comic book artists will often just rip off other designs. They'll be like, oh, that's basically the spaceship from this movie I saw, but that's fine. In concept art, that's not fine. It's like, that's the whole point. Your idea has to be unique. So you can see that your approach to everything, right, is going to be very different depending on what career you choose. And I guess the other thing we could look at is process, where you don't have to include other people in your process that much if you're a comic book artist. Again, people often have very collaborative processes where someone's penciling, someone's inking, someone's coloring, someone's lettering, but it's often very clear cut, like what your role is, right? And you don't have to collaborate that much. Like no one's kind of, it's very rare that you get through halfway inking a page and you sort of hand it up and you're like, which way do you want me to go? It's like you're just kind of left to do your own thing for the most part. There is some feedback, but no one's really telling you like, oh, adjust this line weight or just this kind of thing. It's kind of, you sort of do what you do, and that's been my experience of it anyway. But yeah, you only kind of need that one kind of simple single style of style and process and thing, and you can kind of develop that and you can refine that over years, and that can be something that essentially is like your intellectual property, right? That's something that you can use, ad infinitum. If we look at the concept of productivity, so hopefully that makes sense, right? There's massive differences between sort of the craft and how we actually get stuff done, and how all that kind of stuff works. And I think that's super valuable. But also, if we look at the concept of productivity, being a comic book artist is something where like you have to motivate yourself and do a lot of the basic task management and productivity and motivation. And it's really up to you, like if you kind of mess it up, it's very hard for someone else to take the load off you. We're often dealing with publisher style deadlines where like this thing needs to happen, right? It's super important. It's super critical. If you mess it up, you're completely effed, right? Like you are, that's it. So it's a very different style of productivity and motivation and inspiration. You kind of need to be ready to kind of deal with those things on your own, right? And this is something that took me like a long time to really kind of figure out properly and get sort of good at. And it's just something where you need to make sure you're able to meet those deadlines, that you have a very clear understanding of how long it takes you to create a page or a panel, so that you can get all the work done in a particular amount of time. You need to know from a productivity standpoint that like almost the storyboard you chose in the beginning has to be something you can actually produce. So sometimes if you have a couple of really epic pages, let me know if you kind of have had this happen to you as a comic book artist. Then, sometimes you have to make the other ones pretty simple, right? You're kind of allocating your time, trying to make it all look good. And that's kind of something that's sort of up to you. Whereas, often in sort of concept art, it's just a little bit different, right? If we look at sort of business, again, this is where you're going to get very different scenarios as a comic book artist in terms of business, right? This is where a lot of it is to do with editors. So in the same way that you're looking for interpersonal relationships in most careers, you can probably only work with like a handful of editors or people who are really in positions of power to give you work. And if you kind of get to know a few of those and it kind of like really takes off, then like maybe you don't ever need to know anyone, right? If you know like a couple of people and you kind of really work together, that can last you for either your entire career or like a good part of your career. And often artists will follow editors and creative relationships and partnerships and writing partnerships as well, from editor to editor and publisher to publisher. So these things are very personal, right? It's sort of like a very, very small industry. You're looking to build personal relationships, work with better collaborators, build your craft, get to know people. But also it's important to understand that, unlike concept art, you building your own profile and your own sort of fan base and your own ability to kind of serve people will make a huge difference. So with concept art, often what you're trying to do is just, get the basics happening, right? It's just a matter of like very simple, I think that needs to be on a different layer. With concept art, it kind of doesn't matter whether you, again, as I said, have a big influencer style following or anything like that. But as a comic book artist, you really do need to be able to talk to fans, to build an audience, to kind of connect with people both online, offline, at conventions. And your ability to promote yourself is going to be something that not only helps your career, but it helps your ability to kind of get more jobs, because one of the things that publishers are looking for is fan favorite artists or artists that kind of have a built-in ability to kind of attract people. And again, this is something that, again, I didn't do a very good job of in the French comic book industry. But this is like a major thing, is like how much interest can you build on your own? How much emphasis can you put on this stuff on your own? How can you build relationships? Because then when someone's hiring you to do a book, they're not just hiring you, they're also getting access to your audience. And so again, if you understand the basic business dynamics there, it should be pretty clear, right? That's really important, and that should make a lot of sense. But this is something you need to do as a comic book artist, is really just sort of work the craft of working conventions, getting to know people, and building that audience, building that fan base, because those are the people who make a difference to your career. Is all the different fans, the people where a publisher is going to know that, like, hey, if I hire this person to do this book, I'm not just getting the work, but I'm also getting a certain number of people who are just going to follow that artist, follow that author, and buy sort of everything they do. And a lot of the reason that people are taking a chance on you early on when it comes to publishing or getting publishing deals and stuff like that is that, yeah, they're kind of hoping that the work that you do is something that early on, like maybe it's not going to make them much money, but they're kind of betting that like later on you'll build more of a fan base because they think your work is good, and that they want to build those initial editor relationships with you so that they're the ones who maybe you work with long term, or at least they have good connections with you. So a lot of it is kind of these long-term bets and relationships that happen. And people hoping that, eventually in 10 years, in 20 years, these big publishing catalogs that they have, that you can kind of collect not just the work itself, but also the future attention as that kind of artist and author builds their notoriety and their work. And, that's kind of why it's, people are often getting hired to do these publishing deals and projects, and, they don't actually make that much money, right? A lot of people are getting paid very small advances in publishing, and people will kind of take a chance on you. There's a lot of reasons why that kind of stuff works from a business standpoint, because they're kind of hoping it'll work out over the long term. But it's expected, and what people are also looking for is like your ability to do that. So if someone notices you, it's like, hey, this is a good artist, and they're really good at finding people online who like their work, then that's going to mean like, well, maybe the art isn't that good, but maybe they'll have more fans in the end, and whatever we work on now will kind of sell more. Again, there's all these dynamics. The other thing that, again, a lot of people don't understand about the comic book industry is that frequently artists will make, sometimes half their income or more from commissions or selling original art. And, you also need to liaise with the collector market and understand the power of that. Frequently, if you can build your skills and build those relationships and get known by collectors, and again, there's a whole variety of ways you would do that to build your career in the comic book industry, depending on where you are. This is why often people like to work on Batman and Superman. It's not necessarily because they want to or they like to, although sometimes that's good, but a lot of it is also because if they can do that, then they then have original art that has Batman and Superman on it. That's much, much more, that's worth a lot much more in the collector market. And also, then they're like an official artist who's actually worked on that. And so they're going to get more collectors who are going to want to actually hire them to do commissions. And frequently these, big artists, you may have sort of seen these sort of things and heard of these kind of stories, but yeah, people can often just make like quite large sums of money, sort of like 5 figures or more at each convention, just doing head sketches for a bunch of people, doing big commissions. And so I know, again, from people I know and the stories I kind of hear of like much sort of larger names who get this to work, this is a major consideration, like the collector market getting known for this. And in the long term, this is where a lot of your success will come from. And these things can often persist where you see like artists who maybe they're even not getting work anymore. They're a lot older, but they can still make quite good incomes from the collector market because people remember who they were. So they're not even making money from their books anymore, right? They're not getting jobs. Maybe they're sort of older, but people will still pay for original commission or buy original art or whatever. So anyway, it's very sort of complicated how these different sort of businesses function. So what your expectation is in your pathway to success and the things that you can work on to improve are drastically different. Now, the thing is that obviously with comics, in terms of authorship, you have the ability, and I think it's good to think about the fact that you can essentially author the whole thing yourself as an artist, or as a writer, right? You can learn to draw. Like it is actually possible. You're not dealing with something where by default, by the industry you're in, that you have to collaborate with 100 or 1,000 other people just to make your product. Like you can technically just do it yourself. And a lot of people find a lot of success doing that or collaborating with others and very small teams. But your sense of authorship as a comic book artist is significant. Even if you're just working on someone else's script, on a character that already exists within, some big event or something like that, on one of these big superheroes. Again, I've never done that. I don't have much experience with that, but you're the author. You made it. People are like coming there for you to a certain degree. Whereas, again, for a concept artist, like this is rarefied air. This is not your existence. So it's a much more sort of creator, author friendly environment, and the way you probably need to succeed. And one of the things that will be a good pathway for success as a comic book artist is you figuring this out, right? Is you figuring out how to author your own work, or essentially get more of your vision, your artistic voice, to build your artistic voice. So like, look, maybe it's not 100% your idea, but whenever you touch a project, people feel you in it. They can feel your voice, they can feel your storytelling, your anatomy, what you bring to a project, and people will follow you for that, right? Obviously, like if you're a fan of comics, like that's one of the things we do. It's not like sort of movies or things where like most people don't follow directors. They follow actors, but they're not going to follow directors. Even though director is often much more closely linked to what a project or a movie feels like. So again, it's your vision as an author is immensely sort of powerful and useful, and you have to learn how to sort of develop that. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a good understanding of like, I guess the differences between different career pathways and the different way you would have a business model that would function. And these are the things that often aren't sort of talked about. And when people are just sitting there in the beginning kind of saying, like, I'm not sure what I want to do, I'm sort of tossing up between this or this or this, it's like, well, depending on what you want to do, you really need to get started with some of those different strategies. And you really need to kind of think about what is going to be the pathway to success. It's not all just a matter of like draw really good and make it all happen, right? Like ultimately, in terms of like business metaphors, right? It is a matter of you having a good product, right? And that is your art. If you can really kind of create good things, right? You build it, they will come. Like there is a lot of truth to that. A lot of people like to say that that's sort of not true, that, it's not just about that. But I think the reality is, right, like by and large, if you do kind of make good things, it will make a huge difference, right? Like that's what people are after our art for, right? It's like great product, great, amazing art. Like that does make a huge difference. But it's often the strategy of kind of like how you employ it that will really kind of make the difference, right? In terms of your career. And this is why I think you often find people who like maybe have quite good skills, they have quite good abilities, but they just never quite manage to get all these other bits and pieces really kind of working for them 100%. So anyway, let me know if that kind of analogy kind of helps you to understand some of these kind of challenges that we often sort of face as artists, and how I think we can potentially kind of solve them. So yeah, again, the reason I think it's sort of good to kind of build some places where we can kind of talk about this and really get into it is in order to really take this stuff to the next level, you kind of need almost that one-on-one mentoring style knowledge of specifically where someone wants to go and what they're trying to do and how they're doing it and what their skills are and what their abilities are and how, what sort of pathways they're going to have for success. And I think that's sort of really challenging to kind of teach a lot of these things unless you have that sort of detailed knowledge. So I think a community is actually a really good way to kind of surface some of these things, to talk through them, to like discuss it, to look at other examples, to try and see what works, to kind of test it out. Because you often, again, this stuff kind of takes time to really kind of flesh it out and make it work over the long term. Yeah, and so the things we kind of do inside this community and the things I've sort of got planned is like every month we have sort of a different theme that kind of touches on one of these different sort of pillars, these different sort of aspects of creative craft. And we have we should just sort of talk about, and a lot of the discussion is kind of directed towards that. So everyone can kind of, see if we can get understand that concept better. I often try and do a little bit of sort of a, sort of more theoretical sort of discussion around it to kind of say like, hey, here's what I think, right? Like, here's my opinion. Because the goal for these community things, right? The goal for this Mighty Artisan community that I'm sort of developing is it's not about me. It's not about my knowledge. It's about you, right? And the people that are there and what you can get out of it and what you can improve and the journey you're on. And we're all on a sort of a different journey. We're all at different spaces, different places. We've all got different ideas. So it's not really about me, right? It's a matter of sort of learning from everyone and actually kind of making this real. And I think just talking about it and contemplating these ideas in a much more detailed way is a super useful way of actually learning, because it becomes real, right? It's not just sort of theoretical, like sort of theory, right? Because it's actually related to you and what you want to do. So we have monthly themes, we have sort of regular activities. I often do little challenges that kind of help us tease out and play around, little optional challenges and things we can kind of do to kind of think about that. And yeah, lots of other different ways to kind of interact and talk and chat and do stuff. But the basic idea is to try and build a place where we can kind of have more of these discussions, and you can be around other people who are sort of interested in these same things that I'm kind of talking about. It's like how to actually make it happen. Yeah, not just kind of which brush to use and, all this kind of very basic industry kind of specific stuff. Because I find the real challenge is like, people often don't have a great understanding of where they really want to go, right? Like so many of the artists I talk to are just like, oh, I'm thinking of doing this and I'm thinking of doing this, but I'm not really sure. Even artists who are at who've graduated, right? I said I sort of went to one of those graduation shows and was talking to a whole bunch of people who had just graduated. They were just doing their folios. They kind of had skills. They hadn't really put it all together. Not everyone sort of really knew exactly what they were wanting to do, but even after people have developed skills that are kind of industry specific, they're still like, oh, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. I think this is just a natural part of being an artist, is it takes us a long time to really figure that out, right? So I think you need to do that with the right sort of nuance, right? To actually have the right discussion, especially in the beginning, if you're not quite sure. And the other thing that I find is, like, a lot of people do train very industry specific knowledge, and then a lot of their skills and their functionality and their business knowledge and all that stuff kind of gets locked into, like, this is how I succeeded in this industry, and they don't know how to transition. Or a lot of people don't really understand that, like, as I was saying, like, a big part of what you'll actually do in different industries is going to change and vary depending on, I'm not quite sure about these eyes. It's going to change and vary depending on which industry you're in, and that you kind of need to build and focus those skills kind of really early on, right, to get the most out of it. And I think, yeah, it's just very easy for a lot of us to kind of not really know where we want to go with that. I'm not quite sure about exactly like me with these eyes. I'm like, what is going on with these eyes? Yeah, not sure. We'll think about it. Yeah, let's work on this art for a little bit. I'll come back to a couple of key ideas. So again, let me know in the comments down below, like, what your experience has been with sort of these different educational methods. Also, like, what are you interested in doing career-wise? Have you kind of thought about it yet? Does any of this track? You're sitting there, like, with a good understanding of where you want to go. But yeah, it's very easy for people to get the wrong job, essentially, and not really think about what's involved. Or I think often also what happens is that people kind of don't get a job because they kind of are just attracted and interested in the idea of a job. And then when they actually sort of get closer to being like, these are the skills you kind of actually need to build to do that job, people kind of freak out because they're like, oh, I don't actually like doing that. And so we kind of never really commit, because actually doing that job is not really linked to our creative destiny or our special skills or what makes us unique, or however you kind of want to put it. So yeah, I think really sort of figuring this out is important early on, because often I find, like, what stops people from really taking that next step and getting the professional work is, like, they kind of train in doing something. A lot of people train to be concept artists, and they're like, oh, this is cool. I like this. Sounds fun. You get to come up with a whole bunch of ideas. You never have to finish anything. I get to design these kind of amazing characters for, sort of big video games and stuff. Like, it's all awesome. It's all cool. And then they kind of realize that, it's really hard, and you need to be hyper collaborative, and, you can't just kind of be making your own thing, and that the industry specific requirements and all these kind of things, it's just not really them, so they kind of have built these skills, but yeah, they're just not quite at the point where they can commit and really show people that they understand the design process. They often have had fun in school kind of pretending to be a designer, but really just kind of doing their own thing. And the realities of a lot of these industries kind of shock people when they get in. And other people just freaking love it. They're like, oh man, this is so fun. I'm working with a whole bunch of people. I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff. Oh, I think my camera cut out there. I'm not sure exactly what the last thing I was saying was kind of talking about. But yeah, the TLDR is, a lot of people basically don't understand what a lot of these jobs are, right? And because they haven't sort of thought about this and how they're going to find success and what's going to be involved, yeah, it can often end with a lot of sort of serious disappointment at the end of that, right? And I think this is often what you get is, people are a little bit disillusioned with the different industries, and often people do quit. They sort of burn out because they're just not that interested in the way something works, and maybe they wanted to do something else, but again, like it's important to understand how these things function on every level. So that's one of the things that I've kind of, again, sort of tried to build with this community, is sort of thinking about all these things at once, and I'm trying to sort of build those different separate skills. And I found that this stuff is quite tricky to do. It is quite tricky to find a good way to sort of build a course that sort of talks about this, or build sort of a mentorship program or whatever, to kind of really say, like, okay, this is something that takes like 2 to 3 years to kind of often really sort of figure out. It's really challenging to build a course that kind of talks about some of these issues, even when we are doing university degrees, right, where you have 3 years of curriculum. Talking about all these things is often, it's a little bit challenging, So yeah, I find community is probably the ideal kind of solution to this. So that's why I've sort of landed on it. But that's sort of the basic idea. Anyway, I think for now I'm gonna see if I can sort of finish this and see if we can sort of get some of this sorted. But as I said, let me know in the comments down below, like how that kind of tracks, whether that sort of sounds interesting. And so again, the way I'm sort of running the sort of intake for this community is, this is not for everyone. This is a paid sort of private community. I totally understand not everyone is going to be able to participate in this. It's kind of designed for, people who are like really dedicated to thinking about this, and who like that idea. And my goal for the, probably for like the next year or so is to kind of do sort of limited inductions of sort of new groups of people. So probably do like sort of maybe 3, 4 at the absolute max, where we sort of have an opportunity where you can kind of join and kind of jump in. And when you're listening to this may either be in the middle of one of those, right? In which case you can sort of join, and I'll make sure there's kind of a link down below that you can kind of follow. As I'm releasing this, again, that's obviously the case. If you sort of check it out later, I'll probably put a link to a page that you can join a waiting list if you want to sort of be notified of when we sort of let another group of people in. But I think this is one of the best things to do in terms of making sure that we all kind of get to know each other and where we want to go as a group when sort of a new group comes in. And then you kind of have, sort of 3 to 4 months or something like that, where you kind of will get to kind of know each other better, and we don't have to worry about sort of what happens when new people join all the time. You really can do a lot of these sort of getting to know you things all in one group. So that's kind of my plan for it. Again, let me know in the comments down below, how that sounds, whether that kind of tracks, whether that's something you'd be interested in. I'll put a link down below if this sort of is something that's sort of available right now. Again, when I'm releasing this is still something that you could sort of jump on for this particular point. But yeah, my goal is eventually, maybe later on, this will be something that you could sort of join at any point. But for the moment, it's kind of this limited sort of staged sort of groups, right? Yeah, but again, I'm pretty excited. I've been running this as a beta. Again, I think I forget whether that's like an Australian sort of thing, like beta or beta. Sort of like a test group. I've been doing this for probably 3 to 6 months, where I've been thinking about this. How does it work? How does it sort of function? What's important? And yeah, it's been working pretty well. It's really fun. And this is one of these interesting things that kind of happens with all this kind of social media nonsense. And I think, again, like a really good question that I would kind of ask is like, what's the difference between this and social media, right? If like social media is sort of evil and there's a lot of distractions, I think the thing is that like art is one of these things where we naturally are engaged with it, right? You do have these sort of dopamine loops with your art, where we're making things and we're excited about it, and it can take up your whole attention. But that's a good thing for me anyway. Like, I like sort of being semi-addicted to art because that's what I like doing, and I get a huge amount of satisfaction. And when I spend a lot of time making art, and when I'm talking about art, when I'm getting better at it, again, it kind of like feeds my soul to a certain degree. I've always never regretted developing my art, like talking about it, learning new things, because it builds my career, it builds my ability to make things. So I found, like, again, when I've been on a part of communities for all sorts of things, if there's not, the real thing is, and this is tricky, if you haven't sort of experienced this, if you haven't been part of like a sort of a very specific community or group of people that's like well collated, is when all you're hearing about is just art and it is just the things you're super interested in, and you're all kind of having discussions that are kind of similar and you're all headed in the same direction, it completely changes the way that you view those like distractions and those things and the way you engage and what's positive about it. And it's just really fun, I find. And what I've sort of found is like just seeing what people are doing, and you kind of get to know people. Obviously, I'm the person who's kind of running the whole thing, but still it's super interesting you get to know people in much more detail. You get to see their journey. You get to kind of see when people share stuff and post stuff and they're thinking about this. You can give them advice. And it's just fun because instead of it being stuff where it's algorithmically driven or it's algorithmically controlled, this is just stuff that, that is what you want to see essentially. And if you're not interested in it, then again, that's, you're probably not there, right? So it's like by definition, it's kind of something where everyone who's kind of there is super interested in this, and it just changes everything. Like for me, again, it just changes the whole experience, how much fun it is to kind of see people when they post things. And you kind of know, like whenever you get a notification, whenever you get something, it's going to be something that's kind of related to your journey and what you're doing. So I have found, for me anyway, like I've really sort of enjoyed that aspect of it. And yeah, it's super exciting. I mean, I think in the future, there'll probably be a lot more of these style of sort of private communities. I don't know how many other people have sort of got them. People often ask me like, what's the difference between this and like people's Patreon community? Or often there are a lot of sort of membership sites, right, where there's like a community attached, but it's mostly a matter of sort of someone's sort of course platform with one of these sort of communities or a forum kind of attached. Like this is a little bit different. This is 100% focused on community and the community design and building it so that this isn't just about courses or me or whatever. Like this is about the people there and fostering really good ways for us to kind of talk about art and think about art and sort of develop things like that. So it's a very different to those kind of style of either free online communities where there's often you have to deal with sort of spam, trolls, like bots, phishing. It's often very challenging, and not everyone's that into it, right? Like not everyone is always super 100% dedicated to that path, and often I find what happens is there is a lot of sort of talk of headlines and like what's cool and what's interesting. Yeah, and again, like I'm just way more interested in making art, talking about art, getting better at art. That's kind of all I really care about. I'm not interested in the rest of that stuff. And, over the long term, right, all that drama will kind of go away, but your skills won't go away, right? Like that's the thing that'll kind of stay. And that's, I guess for me is like what's always been sort of really important. I have no idea what I'm doing with this guy's face. I'm still trying to figure it out. So far I'm like not really digging this. I think I need to turn this up so I can sort of not see the underlying stuff a little bit more. But yeah, I always like when I do sort of concept designy stuff. I like the idea of having like sort of multiple eyes where you kind of are never quite sure like which is the real face, right? Because I feel like that is something that you often see in nature, right? Like this kind of weird distractions with sort of plumage. So yeah, for me, again, the real thing that I enjoy the most is just like when it comes to communities and hang out with other artists, the thing that I've kind of gotten the most benefit out of over the years is just a place where like everyone's on the same page. We all kind of know what to expect when it comes to feedback. And one of the things I really also see that is a challenge with online communities in the past is that there is this kind of attitude towards feedback that I find like a little bit sort of problematic, which is that, it's kind of expected that because you're putting your stuff out online or because you're putting your stuff out there that kind of you're wanting this extreme critique, and that in order for us to all improve, right, we kind of need to give each other these kind of epic, art school style lecturer types of feedback sessions, right? And again, what I found is, that kind of works for some people. It's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but there's other ways to improve. And I think that one of the things that we often sort of forget and miss is that you can just learn a lot by hearing everyone's sort of journey and hearing everyone's story and just kind of like sharing your art and sharing your process. And that I think like that's like a major thing that can help you improve. But you kind of have to be in a place that is actually going to support you to do that, where you're not worried about posting. I know like so many artists, we want to be artists, but people are just worried about even posting their work. And it's like, well, how are you going to become an artist if you're not going to show anyone what you're doing, right? And I think a lot of this is because these days on, the sort of modern internet, we kind of understand that, putting yourself out there is kind of asking for it, right? You're sort of asking for critique, and you're asking for people to kind of, like rip you a new one and rip your art to shreds. And a lot of art communities have kind of been built around that idea of critique, and that you have to kind of take critique. And, I found it to be really important to have like a good relationship to that stuff as an artist, and to understand that like, yes, like part of what we do, and maybe like everything we do as an artist is a matter of like us giving, or like putting our work out there, right? And then saying like, what am I going to get in return? Like what's going to get back? What's going to get back, right? Like what's going to happen? And then, just getting good at that, right? Getting good at like thinking about, okay, where am I getting my feedback from? Often what happens is like, your closest people in your family, like siblings or parents or whatever, will just be like, they'll give you this brutal critique that's like, I don't get it. You just get weird stuff. And often when we put stuff online, we're not quite sure what we're going to get back. So I think also like having a good place where you can really go and sort of develop some of those things, I think is really important, right? I think it helps a lot to have a good relationship and a good understanding of critique and feedback. And one of the other things that I say, and that I've sort of tried to make a big part of the community ethos and the design, is that we should all get good at this idea of getting good at communicating who we are as an artist, and really thinking about, well, what is my story and how do I communicate to people in the same way you would communicate to editors, art directors, people who are going to maybe hire you. Like how do you make it really clear like what you should be working on, and what's the next step, and what you should improve? And when you're dealing with feedback with art directors and editors, right, often it is a matter of you getting feedback, and you are going to get critique. You are going to get people saying like, fix this, change this, right? This is no good. Like modify this. So yeah, I think this is like one of these nuanced things where like you, on the one hand, you kind of need a supportive environment, right? Where like just sharing work is okay. On the other hand, we have to learn how to get really good at giving critique, giving feedback, like working professionally, thinking about how to make our work better. So that's another thing that, again, I often find with sort of free art forums and free places, that stuff can be a little bit sort of hit or miss, right? And even with art school, right? Like a lot of art schools and places, they have a very sort of intense relationship to feedback, right? And getting critiqued and being sort of having people sort of be really brutal. And that is because, again, some industries are going to have situations where you're going to get really heavily critiqued, and some don't, right? Some is like, that's not what it's about. So I think, again, having a good understanding of this is really important. Because the better you can build your skills in terms of thinking about, what am I doing? Like, how am I putting my work out here? Like, what am I going to get? Like, what's going to happen? Who's going to give me feedback, right? Like, what's this all going to be about? The better we can do that, the better you're going to improve, the better you're going to be able to work with people. Often also, like getting good at feedback and critique, it is a matter of taking on a lot of these like good industry norms, right? Which is that often when we are doing illustration, again, we don't just hand our work up to clients and say, and this is part of business and process, right? Is we don't often say, hey, like, what do you think, right? We give people 3 options. We're very clear and decisive about how we communicate. When you're working as a concept artist or a studio job, there's often systems where like, oh, we'll do this development, and then we'll do this, and then we'll pick some of these. So we kind of often have to really kind of think about how to communicate visually, like what we're doing, and that a major part of the whole thing of being an artist is a matter of dealing with critique, dealing with feedback. And yeah, I often find that, this stuff is like not handled that well when it comes to people sort of getting used to having to put their work out there. And we often don't build the interpersonal relationships and the ability to communicate with other people that maybe we need to as artists. So again, that's another one of these sort of skill building things that I think community is really good at, because you can practice in communities, right? Hanging out with people, as long as you have a good shared framework and you're all interested in the same thing, you can have really cool, constructive sessions, right? Where you do get to learn what people are about, and you can give them good feedback, and you can practice like asking for feedback and giving people different options and seeing what you sort of get back. And again, it's a little bit more of a safe environment to do that, right? Not this kind of thing where you kind of not, you're never quite sure exactly what's going to happen or what's going to come back at you. Oh man, I need to hustle on this. This is taking ages, but I feel like this weird face thing is kind of working a little bit better. I don't know. Boom. So yeah. Anyway, I hopefully again, that's sort of something that's kind of interesting to you. As I keep saying, I'd be keen to hear your kind of feedback or like ideas, different experiences you've had. What sort of worked for you. Have you had a super harsh critique? Have you had something that just didn't really serve you because it was too brutal? I think everyone kind of views this stuff differently. Everyone needs different things. And, while a lot of these industries are sort of super harsh, also a lot of art directors that I've worked with are very nice. They're very very respectful to artists and the different, sort of needs and proclivities and ways that they're going to take this. And, I personally haven't had a lot of people be sort of super negative or super harsh. So it's always interesting to see that, this is the kind of feedback that people are often really kind of looking for. Yeah, anyway, I think I need to keep working on this, otherwise we're not going to get there in my sort of time frame. Boom. So we'll see if we can, again, a part of productivity in art is knowing kind of like how to speed up, right? Like what can I do to kind of go a little bit faster? How could I finish this in a certain amount of time if we kind of need to? So yeah, maybe I'll see if I can kind of work on some of those skills. So I could maybe obsess over like where this stirrup is and like what's happening here. Or I could kind of just say, let's see if we can kind of move on. Yeah, so I'm not really sure what's happening with this whole world, right? Like what all these different things are. Just kind of playing around, messing around, really. Cool. All right, let's finish this off. Let's do some color. So one of the tricks I like to use when it comes to this, if you are kind of sitting there talking about sort of different productivity and what's going on, is just to ask the question like, okay, if I had to finish this really quickly, right? If I was kind of running out of time, which I kind of am because I'm like, I got other stuff to do today. What would I do? Right? How would we make this better? How would we kind of just get this kind of sorted and finished much quicker? Boom, boom. So here we got, right? I like the idea of making this and hiding some of the ground interaction with, right? This kind of debris and smoke coming up, right? Give a bit of motion. Can't really see 100% what's going on. I'm like, that's cool. That's fine. I'm gonna make it a lot clearer. Boom. And we'll hopefully be able to pull that off. All right. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. So again, because this is behind here, we kind of don't need 100% to draw everything perfectly, because the idea is it's sort of behind a little cloud of stuff. Yeah, cool. All right. Let's do a 10-minute background. Let's see what we can do in 10 minutes. All right, because we've got some of this stuff here, which is sort of similar to what's going on in the foreground, I think the idea is. But we just got to go through it quickly. And often it's just here a matter of like building these kind of shapes. And these are the kind of things that I kind of develop personally after thinking about a lot of these things I've kind of talked about, where as a concept artist, again, you often have to just say like, oh, okay, how do I get the idea across, right? As a comic book artist, I'd probably, just have to figure out my schedule and be able to sort of grind away on these details a little bit more, or just kind of say, maybe I'll kind of work the next panel and make that a little bit better. But often with concept art, you kind of don't get that, right? You got to I got to finish it today, right? I got to finish it like right now. So there's often like a lot of strategies you can use for sort of saying, well, what's important here? Like, what is the most important aspect? How do I increase this? Like, what's good and what's important here? And sort of ignore the rest, right? That's often the basic skill. How do I figure out what's my primary read? Like, what's my secondary read? Like, what's important, what's not? And often if you can kind of do that, you will sort of find that in the end of the day, this is what people see. This is what people are interested in. And that is frequently the difference between concept art, right? So if we think about also looking at the difference between different industries and how like what you focus on and what's going to matter is different. If this is a comic book cover or a comic book panel, people are potentially going to really look at this. It frequently has to be something where people are observing it and thinking about it and being like, how do this is interesting, what's in the background. Like, maybe not, a lot of, again, manga stuff is like, boom, let's just get it done. But frequently, yeah, you're creating something that will exist for ages. And 30 years from now, someone might be like looking at this panel and they're just, if I kind of like futz the details and I'm just like, then they're just going to be like, that's a bit lame. Like, I don't really understand what's going on there. Whereas if it's concept art, most of the time, this is not actually going to be the finished thing. Like, it has actually very little value as an object, like the value it mostly has is in the idea it represents and in the iteration that it kind of changed from the last image that I created. Boom, boom. Right, so again, this might be like version 3 of crazy, right? If we sort of go back to the overall idea, like of sort of character rushing through the alien landscape, right? Like, and maybe this one isn't important. I'm just like, let's see if we can change the vibe and do the thing. And then finally we kind of hit it and we're like, oh, that's it. All right, now go do the actual thing, right? Like now we'll actually take it to the next level, push it forward. But maybe this one is just about the idea. So, the details don't matter. Like me sitting here spending an extra hour or two on those little sort of flowers or things in the background, right? Like maybe it's not going to make any difference. Maybe I could blur them, right? Like maybe I could just kind of blur this and futz around with it, and maybe we'll try that, right? Maybe I'll say like, maybe I could just run a motion blur on all this kind of nonsense, or even you could just do this kind of cheaty stuff where you're like, okay, let's try and take this and sort of copy it. Oh, right, see if I can sort of put some of it over here, right? Boom. All right, get rid of that. Is anyone going to notice? Probably not. And that's the difference between those industries, right? It's like, is it skill? Is it craft? It's like, well, a lot of it's process, a lot of it's focus, a lot of it's me understanding what the difference is. And I find where people really struggle with these things is that, you sort of get into concept art thinking like, oh, this is where I get to draw lots of cool things, and I make my whole life about the details, and I get to finesse this, and everything I'm doing matters. It's like, nope, no, that's not what it's about, right? But again, there's a lot of fun that people have with, as I'm saying, I'm just like, what's the idea? I don't really personally care whether I ever get to, finish an illustration like this. I like the energy of concept art. I've sort of always enjoyed doing that. I love comics as well, but I think often with these sort of career choices and really sort of thinking about where you want to go and what you want to do, it is kind of nuanced, and it does require you to figure out what you like and what you're interested in. And that'll often mean that you're either pushing against the grain of that particular industry, right? You're like, yeah, that's awesome. Or you kind of hate it, right? And it's no fun. All right, so what I'm going to try and do, boom, 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 boom. Is here, right? We're going to have a couple of these, but I'm going to suggest these over here, right? Because that's not very important. I don't want that to be sort of clear. And over the back here again, just suggesting. Boom. Right back here. Boom, boom, boom. Anyway, that'll have to do. All right, how am I going for time? I think I have about 1 minute to do these, whatever this is. Let's rotate that a bit more. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom. 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 Boom, boom. So people often have started commenting on how I kind of often make these funny noises when I'm drawing now. And mostly it's just because I don't have anything to say, right? So that's the thing. But that is often what we do, right? It sort of gives us something to do when I got nothing. Right. Boom. 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 Cool. Even that, I'm like, oh, it's a bit rough. It's not quite working, is it? So again, it's always a matter of knowing, like, will that fly? I'm like, I don't think so. I think I need a bit more illusion of detail up here. Don't. Boom. 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 And see if we can add some depth. Probably need some depth behind, some depth in front, some indication more of like sort of texture or how we're kind of able to add a little bit of something here. Boom, boom, boom. So obviously the other thing that like online community is really good at is, as I said, like just sharing your work and like getting critique and feedback from other people. That's a big part of how I kind of got better early on. Just make sure this is on the right layer. It's like really just improving on online forums, but it was very different back in the day, right? The forums that I got better on aren't here anymore, and the internet is way more crowded, and most of that stuff happens on Facebook groups. And when you're in Facebook land, right, you don't get to control what you look at, and often the goal of being on Facebook is to make you annoyed or sucked into some headline or something like that. So it's really hard to get that kind of immersion, right, that I think is like so important about sort of getting critiques and knowing what you're going to expect. It takes a lot of trust to kind of put your work out there and really sort of ask. And and know what you're going to get back. And then the other thing is, like, the more you kind of get to know people, this is what I really liked about forums back in the day, is, you really get to know people properly over the long term. And this is something that is very hard. It kind of happens in an 8-week course that I've done quite a bit of, where you sort of get to know each other for a little bit, and that's really fun. But what takes this to a whole new level is really getting to know people. And then, like, when they give you feedback, you're kind of like, oh, well, so-and-so would say that, because that's kind of what they're about, right? And, you kind of start to take stuff a little bit less personally, right? Because it's more a matter of who's giving it. You can contextualize it a little bit more. Where people are coming from, people's general tone. It's just that nuance that I think you kind of need, that it's just often really hard to build in sort of free groups or things like that, or where there's not structures and frameworks around it. All right. I feel like this is needlessly rough, right? Let's see if we can add a little bit less, make that suck a little bit less. All right, last layer, the cloud layer, the make or break cloud layer. Boom, 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 boom. So you may be listening to this and you already know about the Mighty Artisan community. Maybe this is just kind of helping you to either figure out whether or not you want to sort of jump on here, or you may already be inside, and maybe this is just kind of, you can just kind of listen to me talk about why I think this is important, which you probably are sick of hearing me talk about by now, if you're already in there, because this is, all sort of old news. But we have had, like, sort of, in this sort of initial induction, had like a lot of cool people join. It's been really fun to kind of hear everyone's story, and people sort of go through a lot of the initial kind of mini workshops that I have to kind of just figure out initially. This is one of the things that try and do is to try and build some of these things that I'm talking about, like, into just the way everything functions. So, even when we look at sort of the onboarding videos and the mini course, that kind of just makes sure, like, okay, here's how you find your way around. Here's how we make our first post. Here's how we think about giving feedback. As, like, part of that is also trying to surface some of these larger issues of, like, where do you want to go? Like, how do you tell your artistic story? How do you do that? How do you think about categorizing your goals and who you want to be as an artist, and communicate that visually to other artists? Because this will help you practice these ideas, right? And get better at all of this. And it's been really interesting to see people kind of jump on and get on board with that. And I think that, one of the big differences, and the thing that kind of, people are often like, what's the difference between this community and other communities? And I often say it's like, it's a bit like a party, right? Like, that's the best metaphor I can give, which is like, some parties are good and some parties aren't. It doesn't mean parties are good or bad. It really is very specific to the type of person you are, whether you vibe with the other people there, whether the host knows what they're doing. Like, it's very sort of amorphous and tricky to sort of judge, right? But again, so far I think we've had, like, a lot of success kind of, like, finding people who are, like, really into this idea. And yeah, it's been super awesome to kind of see that initially. And yeah, I find that these skills are kind of, some of these skills, like, you could take a course, right? And we can kind of teach that sort of stuff in there. I often do little sort of mini courses, or people ask me a question, then yeah, I'll kind of respond and talk about it and give you my sort of 2 cents. But the other thing is, it offers a lot of opportunity to, with sort of live streaming sessions and things, really sort of dig into some of these problems and see, like, if people are having challenges sort of figuring these things out. Like, it's very easy to kind of go deep, right? Because we have the tools, everyone's on board, everyone's sort of there for a good reason. There's kind of a good vibe, and it's a lot easier to kind of share your story and be a little bit more vulnerable, and sort of find other people who are interested in the same thing. And one of the most interesting things about being an artist is, like, often we do think, like, hey, this is just me, I'm just the odd one out. And what you find is, like, no, like, most other artists feel exactly the same thing. And it's good to know that, right? Like, one of the things that I got from being very early on in sort of online forums was, we'd have people like sort of Craig Mullins who would be on those early forums, and he is like, back then he was a god of of a painting, and he now is like even better, right? And is essentially often regarded as like the grandfather of digital art, right? He kind of created a lot of these ideas. But one of the things I got from him is like he would not be super keen on his own work. He was often just kind of sitting there saying like, meh, I'm not that good. I could be better. And as someone who was just starting out, and my work was like completely average at the time, there was nothing special about it. But hearing someone else say that kind of really got through to my mind that like this is never going to end. I'm always going to feel this way, and that this is an art form where we are sort of dealing with developing sort of constant self-improvement, right? And that there's always things to improve. There's always things that you could make better. And if you kind of get used to that, it makes the whole thing a lot more fun, and I think gives you a much better idea of kind of what being an artist is going to be like. I kind of knew from talking to so many professional artists back then that like this was a reality, right? Like a lot of people were always wanting to get better, and it wasn't something where suddenly you became professional, or like I was saying, you kind of get your foot in the door and then it's kind of all over. You just become a different person. It's like, no, you kind of bring you with you, right? And a big part of what makes people get better is being self-critical. And I think this is also one of the real values that you get from community, is kind of understanding where other people are coming from. And, through your sort of shared experiences and seeing that everyone else struggles with this stuff as well, it's just immensely de-stressing, right? To just kind of understand that everyone else is struggling with the same stuff. And, like a lot of professional artists still really struggle with the concept of like how to, like how to transition their career, or how do they make their kind of business function, right? It's always a bit of a challenge. Where are we? Here. Boom. Yeah, I feel like I'm like, oh, I want to spend more time on this, but I think I'm well and truly out of time. So I'm just going to try and see if I can add a bit more kind of shading here and there to that. There we go, on the wrong layer. That frequently happens with Photoshop. Right, boom. Right, so I'm just going to select the wrong one. I mean, it's probably user error, but it's often they keep changing the interface. Boom. Right, let's see if we can add a bit of sort of shadowing under here, right? Like push a few of these little kind of shadows, add a bit more sort of texture and nuance. Boom. Right. Boom. Oh, I don't know whether I need that. Probably could add some texture here. Right, add some texture here. Again, this is not, I feel like I could be pushing the design. Speaking of feeling like we could always improve, right? I feel like I could really push the design here a lot more. This is not super original. Don't know how this would go from an actual sort of concept design point of view. Not fleshing out enough of the details. Boom. But yeah, that'll probably do. See if we can push. I feel like that's an important line. Add a little bit of motion there. Right. Boom. Boom. So yeah, this is going to take way longer than I thought it would. I was like, oh, 2 hours. I think we're well over that now. Boom. Boom. All right. What else have we got? All right. Just add a little bit of texture. Some of these things feel kind of a bit empty. Boom, 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 boom. All right. I'm done. That's it. I'm out of time. We'll start from the foreground. All right. We'll hit, oh man, it's doing this particular Photoshop-y thing. All right, and we will fill. Let's get rid of those. Boom. So a lot of the techniques I've developed, right, in terms of comic books and efficiency, a lot of the sort of actions you see me use, a lot of these things is it's me trying to use my comic book skill set for concept art. And what I kind of found is, again, there's lots of interesting ways that, you can sort of do that and transition those skills, but you do need to kind of really think about like what's important in a particular industry, like what's gonna make yourself useful. How do I? Right, it's all a matter of how do I become useful. All right, this. Let's. Oh man, I'm forgetting which keyboard shortcut it is. Yeah, not that one. Let's go back. All right. Select that one. Boom. There we go. All right. Hide that. Let's select this guy. Do the same thing. So as I go into the background, right, I'm going to start caring way less about exactly how pixel perfect I am with a lot of these selections. And it's mostly a matter of trying to find out where we've got gaps and things. Boom. Is that? Oh, there we go. All right, it's all coming up Millhouse. We're good. Boom, boom. And one of the reasons, again, like I really started initially trying to do different things on YouTube than what I kind of saw, including stuff like this, which is like do something that's kind of like a mix of sort of streaming, a mix of like me just showing you exactly what's happening with my process. Is that, when I see a lot of tutorials out there, one of the things I kind of notice is that, a lot of the appreciation for how long this takes, even when we're doing concept art, even when it is really fast, it often feels like people have this unreasonable expectation that art should be like sped up, right? That we should be doing all these things really fast. And it's important to understand because often people will be like, oh man, this is so slow. I'm not going to watch a tutorial that's like 3 hours long or whatever. And the reality is, like, I'm pretty fast, right? Like this is pretty fast. But still, for most people, watching this is going to feel like watching paint dry, right? And that's because, again, like making your art is a lot more sort of exhilarating, right? And it feels a lot sort of faster when you're actually kind of making it. But also, again, I think we often have a slightly sort of challenged understanding of like what's actually involved when it comes to creating art these days, which I think is like a bit of a shame, considering how much good information there is out there and how much ability there is for people to kind of actually share what their process is. But often what we get is like a lot of fast sped up tutorials. We get a lot of stuff that just isn't actually what being an artist is like. It isn't actually talking about the things that I feel are important. And yeah, I find that often holds artists back a lot as well. It's just the unreasonable expectations about what they should be doing, like what a good art is, how long it should take. Yeah, and sort of what is a good career to have. I feel like there's also like a massive focus on a lot of industry advice and sites and a lot of sort of training things. Often like the fundamental key they kind of use is like, you want to become professional, you want to become pro. So it's all really focused on these sort of jobs that, not everyone enjoys, not everyone is kind of interested in. And there's not a lot of thought put into kind of which job do you want and why do you want that? And is that actually what you want to do? Because, quite frequently, like that's not the best way to kind of market those courses and make all that stuff work. And it is just honestly, the other thing that I think is good about community and being able to have a more private space to make videos, like for me, or to sort of give advice, is frequently what I find is I will have an idea that I think is really helpful. But it's just really challenging to make a good video about it because I know it's not going to be dramatic enough, or one of the problems is, like, as you get into doing more YouTube or social media stuff, you kind of realize, in order for me to like communicate this to people and really say, hey, this is something I found in my career that's really important, you kind of have to package it, right, in sort of more drama, and then that just leads to the drama, right? It just sort of is adding to the FOMO and the internet drama and the kind of nonsense out there. So it's often really challenging to kind of have this kind of message, which is like, we kind of need to get away from that. We need to chill out. You just need to work on your art, because that's often not exciting enough to kind of get everyone to sort of click and engage and kind of do this. And so I think that's often why you see a lot of those sort of different styles of sort of art education out there and different sort of videos. And I mean, that stuff's all fun, but you know, you got to be making art first, right? Like everything's about actually making art, not about sort of talking about drama surrounding art or what other people are doing with their art or whatever. Like, it's only really going to be useful if you're already doing your art. That's what I find anyway. And again, one of the things I wanted to do, and I'd say, like, me playing around with community and trying to do more of this stuff is me just taking this all to the next level, is trying to get closer to helping people understand what it's actually like to be an artist, what's involved, what's good about it, what's challenging, and, you know, where the struggles are, how to solve those things. And, you know, YouTube is good, but again, there's ads, there's distraction, and, you know, that's all fair enough. Like, that is just what it is. But yeah, I find being able to kind of talk about different concepts and then get feedback and then create more content for it, think about different strategies, see what worked, see what didn't. It's much more dynamic. It's much more real. And it's less a matter of sort of just trying to get the most clicks, right? Which, again, is often the game you sort of end up playing with YouTube, or basically anything, right? Like anything where we're sort of playing these sort of click games. And I think one of the things I kind of said is, like, it's tricky because on the one hand, you have sort of social media and the ability to promote yourself as an artist and sort of work for it in essentially any country on earth on sort of all sorts of projects. You know, like, it's very democratized in terms of, you know, you being able to create amazing art for a huge variety of different things. But the problem is that often the social media kind of sucks us in there with drama, right? And you kind of don't actually get to know how to use it properly. So I think another good thing to think about as a distinction that may kind of help you is just to understand that, like, social media is a great place to kind of go and promote yourself. And I think YouTube is genuinely like a great place to kind of learn, but it's often hard to really figure out how to integrate skills there. It's a great place to kind of start. But really, the thing you need to do is actually apply that stuff to you. You actually need to go out and sort of do it. You actually need to kind of make it happen. And that stuff is a lot harder to really do. On the internet these days, right? There's so many distractions, so many of these different bits and pieces you've got to pay attention to. But I think that there's lots of opportunity with social media to kind of find people who are into your art, to connect with other people, to get better jobs. All that stuff is kind of real, right? It does all kind of work. But you've got to figure out kind of how to use it, right? And not sort of think that, like, again, like, I see a lot of younger sort of people who are just starting out, or people are thinking about, like, oh, you know, I have to build a brand on social media. Like, how do I do this? And, you know, it can be sort of exhausting. You have to really have a really sort of good strategy for all that. All right, let's see how we can go with a lot of this art. Need to make more art. Boom, 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 boom. This is crude. We're at the tail end of all of this. Boom, 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 boom. So part of this is like me connecting it up so that basically this little shape in the background. Boom, 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 boom. So this kind of works. All right. All right. I think that's it. There we go. And this one should be a little bit easier. Oh. There we go. Boom. And lucky last is the clouds. So the good thing about this sort of process is that once you sort of get to this stage, it's kind of all done, right? Like really it's just a matter of chilling out, doing the colors. And this is also where the particular process you use is very much linked to who you want to be as an artist. So a lot of people don't like this type of process because you like I at the moment I don't really know what this is going to look like. One of the best things about a line and color process is you kind of get surprised at the end. You get this little thing where you kind of do all this work, and as I'm working on it now, I kind of have this anticipation where I'm like, boom, oh yeah, I can't wait to kind of see what this looks like whether this works. You kind of plan a bunch of stuff. I got a bunch of ideas, but it never really comes together until right at the end. And this to me is like the most fun thing about it. But a lot of people really dislike that because it's not like painting where you kind of get to see the painting emerge, right? It goes from blurry to kind of detailed, and you get to kind of have a really strong idea of what the overall mood is. Whereas with line and color, we kind of do it the opposite way, right? Where you kind of find the mood right at the end. And I know for a lot of people that is not how they like to roll. And it can be very sort of challenging. So let's see if we can do a sort of super quick coloring process here and see how we go with this. I'm interested to see whether my computer will sort of handle the what kind of handle this. Boom, boom. Yeah, that'll do. Now let's do some clouds. All right, again, that looks cool. Let's sort of do, and I think what I wanted here was like some sort of green. Right, boom, boom, boom. Except again, we probably want it to be a little bit more blue-green. Hmm. Think about this. So I'm going to use some super crude tools here. Just giant big brush. Giant round brush. Super rough. Oh, let's go back to 100%. And again, sometimes I have to, again, midway through, I'm like, what am I doing? Okay, this is more like concept art, right? I can't spend that extra 2 or 3 hours to kind of really push something to that sort of nth degree, that sort of crazy degree. This does have to be a little bit more, kind of subtle, right? A little bit more rough and ready. A little bit more suggestion, right? And we'll see whether we can blur it and save it that way. And yeah, I'm not quite sure whether that's the right. I'm pretty sure I'm cutting against the grain of what is sensible with the background. because it's a warm background, and that kind of was looking cool, but I have a feeling that what I want is, yeah, something like that, at least to begin with. Yeah, all right, cool. And then let's go, see if we can change the hue here. Yeah, all right. So again, this is often what I do. I'm just like messing around, playing around with it. All right, so one of the things I want to do here with this stuff, right, boom, boom. Right, so let's put in a base. Let's slowly mix those colors together. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. All right. And let's make a new layer. Let's do gradients. Oh, yep. G for gradient tool. And in my mind, this was pink, right? Like these things were sort of pink. Something like that. I have no idea whether that's going to work. B for brush. Let's go X. Let's see if we can hit the foreground. Right, let's see if we can hit this as well. All right, I'm getting there. So yeah, I had big plans to keep talking about my fancy community thing, but now I'm just like, I gotta make the art, gotta make this cool. Oh, that needs to be way darker because it's foreground. All right, boom, boom. Yeah. What about this? Let's see if we can mix it up. Make it a bit darker, something like that. All right, now let's see if we can go through here because I do want this to kind of be. I'm wondering, like, I mean, we'll see. I mean, this it's hard to know. Sometimes you get really fun things happening when it comes to just leaning into the concept art style, right? But let's see if I can. I basically want that with like a tiny bit more green in it. So I was like, maybe this could be more sort of green, but then I have a feeling that like going through and adding a lot of these extra bits and pieces might kill me in terms of, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say. It might just take a whole bunch of energy and effort away from me trying to add some greenness to these. But I got a couple of tricks. And so, yeah, concept art is often about tricks, right? It's about like, what can I do in 5 seconds to make this look better? What can I do here to make this look better? Like, how can we, you know, how can we make this fun? How can we hack this? How can we get this going? And different types of illustration are completely different. So again, so much of this is just figuring out like what do you enjoy? Does that sound fun? Does figuring out how to cheat sound fun to you, or does it sound like cheating? Like that's not something you want to do. See, I'm not really sure what I had. This kind of, these are like cactus things with like a weird sort of red flower. I didn't really have a strong idea about what this was, which is why again the line and color process is so kind of fun, right? You kind of get to play around with this. So I'm using a lot of sort of dodgy mixing of gradients and flat color here. So again, this is pretty rough and ready. Boom, boom, boom. But hopefully it'll work if we kind of get it all sorted in the end. All right. So yeah, I think that's enough. And again, I feel like we're kind of getting the same feeling over there. I do feel like there's like an intensity of color here that might be worth sort of exploring with these foregrounds. Let's select that. G for gradient. Right. Can I kind of pump that up? Can we do the same thing here? Right. Again, I'll play around with that in a minute. All right, what have we got here? Got this. Well, like that can just, oh, maybe I didn't do those. Oh yeah, that's annoying. All right, let's fix that. Take off. So again, lucky us that it caught this. Hopefully this won't take too long to kind of fix. Let's just do it by hand. I think otherwise it's going to end badly. Boom. Most boring bit of the whole video, I reckon. So yeah, I haven't done one of these art ritual videos for quite a while because I've been super busy. Part of that is, again, working full time. Part of that is doing other YouTube videos that I felt like were kind of like cool and a bit more sort of interesting to do at the time. And yeah, part of it is because I've spent ages setting up a lot of this sort of community stuff. All right, let's get that back. Boom. All right. What's happening here? What's going on, guys? Probably a little bit of this will go a long way there. Boom. All right, yeah, that can all go that color. Cool. I mean, it's not working. Now, what I want is for this is always the question, is like how, like what sequence do you do this in? What sequence do you do it in? How do we do it? How do you do it quickly? I kind of like that actually. I kind of like it being yellow. Let's again, that was a complete mistake. Let's see if I can lean into that, because I was just trying to get that. All right, let's see if I can. Let's see if I do control, if I change this. Is that better? Is that the focus I want? Do I want less focus? It's hard to say. These are the decisions. So I'm looking at it in the screen up above, and I can see like real sort of small thumbnail of it. Yeah, I'm like, I think yellow is good. That's kind of what it was. No, I think I want the focus of the color to be on the environment. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to see if we can keep kind of pushing the dust in there. I'm going to keep this creature thing, right, this color. See if we can add a little bit of sort of really subtle nuance to it super quickly. So this is where, again, like thinking traditionally can be super useful, because there is a pattern and a way you would probably do this traditionally that, look, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it can kind of help us. Where, you know, you kind of think about like, what do I do first, right? Like, what do I do second? What do I do third? And if you kind of get things in the right sequence, you can often save quite a bit of time. All right. Okay, boom, boom. All right, next. So like, again, this is where I'm like, I think this stuff in the bottom is gonna sort of be all right. Let's see if we can add like a feeling of transparency here and there. All right, new layer. Let's see if we can. And what I'm going to do is just try and see if I can get the rough tonality here right. So we'll take that. Again, I'm going to hit. Yeah, something like that. Boom, 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 boom. Cool. All right. So again, probably it would be cool to like play with these colors a little bit more, but I reckon just kind of keeping this pretty low toned down as well might work. Might be cool to play around with some hair here. Maybe this could be a particular color. So if we're not quite sure about that, I can select this. All right, we can. Oh, that's cool. Let's do that. We can match the hair with the things. All right, that's enough. Because again, that's like, it sort of says like, oh yeah, you know, this is intentional, right? Boom, boom. Okay. All right, there we go. I think it's, I'm like, oh yeah, this might work yet. And again, these are all sort of tricks that you sort of develop, like figuring out how to develop a color scheme kind of quickly, right? And what I'm sort of thinking here is there's probably a bunch of stuff I can do that will make this kind of work and not feel super awkward. And you kind of won't notice that most of it is kind of very half-baked, just because of the sort of sequence that I've done this. All right, boom. So we're just going to hit and find those kind of key items that really need sort of working. And then what I'm going to do is just introduce like a little bit of sort of temperature variation to some of these bits and pieces. And just work with kind of subtle temperature variation. But I reckon at the end of it, we might not notice or care that it's all pretty rough. But yeah, so this is starting to destroy my computer. I can feel it. I can feel it struggling. Boom, 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 boom. All right. But what I'm after is just trying to separate a couple of these kind of areas out, make some of these slightly different. Boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. All right, and then I'm going to hit 50%, and I'm just going to see if I can add a little bit of texture and separation here to kind of separate out some of these areas. So this stuff is super rough, but this is often actually the process that for something like concept art that would kind of work, right? Because I'm making sure that I don't create too much value contrast or color contrast, right? You can see a lot of these things are like very kind of simple in the way they kind of work, right? But if I just kind of keep pushing a couple of these, it'll just separate things out just enough. And because I've got this 50% opacity selected, right, I'm a little bit more confident that I can just sort of go through and kind of add a few details here and there. And overall, all right, it's going to come together all right. But still, as you can see, right, if you really sort of zoom out, this is kind of super rough. But yeah, I want this to be way more pink. All right, and whatever this thing is, this sort of jewelry thing she's got here, right? Boom, I want that to be different. Yeah, what else can we do? All right, let's see if I can get some of that sort of pink also over here. Again, I'm not sure whether this is going to feel creepy or weird or whatever, but I guess it doesn't matter. Cool. I think that's probably all we got time for. I guess the question is like, can we add 5 seconds of atmosphere and make this not be quite so rough? So there's a couple of things we'll do. I got here this new layer, all right? And what I'm going to do is line and color tutorial. This is often tricks. If you've watched my tutorials before, you kind of know what's coming. Although the problem here is that the computer is going to absolutely hate this because it is going to start chugging. And the other thing we could do as part of this is some shapes, but I don't know whether I have a lot of the shapes that I normally use for sort of concept art here. So yeah, it'll probably just have to be some of these kind of larger. Oh no, I don't want that. Let's go back to this dust particles. See if we can kind of add a little bit of texture in the background. Again, this is all super, super rough stuff, but might help us a little bit with kind of adding a bit of atmosphere. All right, next step, I'm going to make all the atmosphere layers. Boom. Oh, that's not where the atmosphere layer goes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm going to start with the one at the top. And yeah, just see like what would be a cool kind of color, right? I like the kind of greeniness, right? Like I think I'm like something there. And so yeah, we'll see whether that will kind of work. And then here, what I'm going to try and do is see if I can kind of add this atmosphere going up, right? And see if I can add, then we're on this layer, which is above this, that's fine. And then here is probably where, again, we sort of really want to sort of push it. Well, the other thing we could do is like clip this to the character layer, right? And really see if like maybe we wanted to sort of push the silhouette a little bit more. hard to say. I think probably the way it is probably fine. You could also try and, right, like really kind of push the red there. All right. We can see this is probably, now it's probably like pushing everything a little bit much. So we can totally just start tweaking all these bits and pieces. All right. Now let's see if we can really push this stuff in the background back. So I'm actually going to go back to the clouds and see whether we can again push that back. Let's see if we can get some blue sky. Right, let's push that back. Yeah, cool. And here, got the mountain. Now let's just pick that atmosphere color from the mountain. Let's see if we can just sort of fade that out, right? I might try and actually hook that up to the mountain itself. Yeah, let's do that. Hook it to the mountain. Boom. All right. It's kind of all right. I need to push this back. And so this is like, again, what I would sort of call that kind of atmosphere pass. And it's just kind of like trying to separate out like what, where these kind of key elements are. Let's see if we can go airbrush and sort of push that a little bit. And so now it kind of has atmosphere, but it also is sort of lacking impact. So what we can do now is see if we can add some impact back in terms of thinking about our kind of like overall color scheme and also our kind of overall tonality. And we can play around with different ways to do that. Levels. Boom, boom. Boom. Yeah, bit more contrast. Let's do select, color range. Yeah, see if we can hit these sort of foreground elements. I'm thinking, yeah, maybe it's just a matter of taking all those atmosphere passes that we've kind of done and just kind of dialing them back a little bit. That's often the case. So we're just adjusting the sort of foreground read, the middle ground read, the background read, all these different kind of reads. Right. Yeah. Cool. And what I'll try instead is just boom. Adding a bit of color here. So yeah, pretty psychedelic. I'm going to try and push the color contrast. I'm not worrying too much about the sort of value contrast. I like that kind of French clean line look. All right, let's see if we can really, again, sort of push some of those things back. Let's do this, but let's make it just affect the luminosity. Right, let's see if we can push. Do this. Then like select color range. Let's see if we can just hit the, we're not on the right thing. Select color range. Boom. Just see if we can kind of pick out those reds again and really make them pop. Cool. And there's probably a few situations here where we could probably pull this back, right? So like that might be a little bit oversaturated. Yeah, cool. Let's move that away from there. Move it away from there. Starting to get something that I feel like is kind of working. Yeah. I think moving it towards that kind of psychedelic, yeah, taking a bit of the color out, I think is good. Take a bit of the color out, take a bit of the saturation out. Then we can always add it back in, adding a bit more value contrast. Yeah, I think there we go. That's kind of what we want. Cool. And let's turn on this. Turn on our texturizer. Let's add some splatter texture. Let's make that larger. Turn that off. New layer. Right. Let's see if we can pull the volume down on that sort of texture. This will, if your computer cannot handle this, this will just destroy everything, right? This will just completely, these kind of big brushes on a giant file like this can be totally brutal. All right, make another one. Let's see if we can go in with a few more of these sort of dust particles and things. Right, again, get that feeling of being kind of flying it, and I would add sort of motion blur and stuff to this as well, but I don't know whether we're going to have sort of time to do it sort of properly. But we could do an easy one. Just do, let's paste, filter, blur, blur, motion blur, boom, boom. All right, let's see if we can kind of push some of these things. Right, again, where it's kind of blurry here. Oh, that's annoying. Yeah. All right, so some of them can be super blurry. Again, boom, boom. All right, boom. So again, this is not realistic camera blur or anything like that, but hopefully it can help us. And again, this is where like sometimes just a little bit of this will kind of help to, again, blur out where we kind of haven't done a super great job with all of the art, right? see if I can push the focal areas right, get this guy's sort of face to be at least a little bit in focus. Anyway, kind of worth playing around with, right? And often it's good to we can sort of keep going with some of those sort of gradient adjustments, right? I think it's often good to kind of put a little bit of like a traditional sort of film grade style thing on there. Again, when in doubt, that's always going to focus us a little bit more, and just kind of do those last kind of focusing mirrors. Sometimes again, it's not going to help, but sometimes that can make all the difference. And again, I often find so often that just doing like a few, like once you've kind of done all that, like then doing some sort of major sort of gradient work as well will often bring everything kind of together, right? Or like if we kind of have like movement across the frame in terms of color, right? Like that can also be kind of really interesting. But yeah, probably for like a big illustration, this is not necessarily stuff you want to do. Here we go. Yeah, we've hit 2 terabytes, so we need to save it as a PSB. This is a sign it's time to stop, Tim. It's time to stop. I think we've been going for way longer than I was anticipating, but again, hopefully it's been cool to kind of see the process. Again, I should probably stop, otherwise this will sort of keep going. But yeah, this was a fun little image to make. Good example of, again, combining sort of different industries, different sort of concepts, different processes, different ideas. And I'll leave a link below to the Mighty Artisan community if that's something that sounds interesting. If you've been sort of thinking about it. Again, this is something that'll probably, based on when I sort of post this will only be available for like another sort of 2 or 3 days, I think, as something that you can kind of join until you wait for sort of next time. But if this sounds cool, if this is something you'd like to be a part of, certainly check out that link, jump on board. It is a paid community, right? It's not cheap. It's not designed to be sort of free, like easy Netflix style subscription. The goal is everyone in there is like super dedicated. Yeah, maybe later on I'll put some more information about this in sort of subsequent videos, and we'll do some more inductions, and then maybe at one point again it'll be the kind of thing where like you can join at any point. But for the moment, just trying to keep it sort of small and more sort of private, secluded. Make sure we get a cool bunch of people in there. And yeah, I think from what we've kind of seen so far, that's kind of really happened with the first few people who've kind of joined. And yeah, that's what it's all about, just hanging out, making art. This is kind of what I like to do. I like to make personal art, something that I found like really has helped my career and my creativity overall. So anyway, thanks for hanging out. If you're still here, I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully this has been sort of interesting, hearing me talk about community and things. Hopefully, even if you're not interested in joining this, I've been able to kind of impart a little bit of knowledge that I've sort of learned over my career. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think of this, what your experience is with sort of education, different communities, what you like, what you don't like, what you might like to see. And yeah, check it out. I'll leave a link in the sort of comments down below or in the description. You can go check out Mighty Artisan, and again, see if it's something you're interested in. If this is kind of the induction is kind of over, there'll be a little waiting list or something like that. And next time we kind of open up the doors, you'll be the first to know. So anyway, thanks so much for listening. Catch you around. Happy drawing.